Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it was a searing hot day, as if the climate itself had held the people in the small, unassuming, rather charming rural town in Wyoming to ransom. The weather did not apologize for the wrath it had inflicted indiscriminately on the locals that lived here, as if it held a vengeful vendetta against the people and was waging war on its citizens. It was all that anyone could talk about, from the butchers to the bakers and the greengrocers, about how indomitably cruel the weather had been of late. Even at night the stranglehold of heat insisted on robbing the locals of a good night's sleep, and many people went to bed at night accompanied with wet towels and even ice packs, because getting to sleep when you felt like a lobster on a grill was not easy by any manner of means. Yet still the cruel weather aggressively persisted, with an unrelenting, dogged determination, as if like a marathon it had a race that needed to be completed. Many people claimed that they'd been able to fry eggs on the bonnets of their cars, as that was how extreme the weather had become, even up in the mountains when things should be significantly cooler. But it would seem the heat refused to show any mercy. If that was not bad enough, the fly problem had gone way out of hand, as the summer loomed steadily along, like a long ball of your grandmother's knitting wool, that you roll up that never seems to come to an end. The countryside had been dappled by the evidence of this dry heat, as if the scorched land had an insatiable thirst and was thirsty for the rains to fall, so that the repentant stone-washed countryside might at long last regain some of its lush green resplendence, which was being sadly lost under the formidable glare of this withering heat, as everything without exception, from the plants to the animals and people, were suffering badly. People around here were dreaming of cooler weather, as if it was something that seemed so beyond their reach, rather like an impossible goal you could never ever attain. It would seem many had short memories, that had quickly forgotten how brutal the previous long cold winter had been, always made more pronounced by the never-ending winds that Wyoming is well known for, that make you believe the weather is a whole lot colder than it actually is, as these seasonably cold winds can cruelly pierce through bone, marrow, and sinew. Ranchers here in Wyoming were doing everything in their power to destroy these miniature buzzards of nature, these annoying pests we call flies, that seem so intent on making the livestock as miserable as possible. This was the western part of Wyoming, which gladly rejoices as it proudly leaves behind the more flatter grasslands and prairies, and magnanimously opens up like a glossy book into another world, or a micro-universe if you like. Many visitors to this part of the state have described it like that, as if they were visiting another country in America, when they come here, because it is so very different. Ostensibly for miles and miles dark roads snake out before you, surrounded by vast stretches of grassland and prairies that seem to go on forever and ever, as if there is no end or beginning in sight. The further west you go, the more spectacular the scenery becomes. Soon you are met by the rolling hills, the changing colours of moss and grass, vast expansive pine forests that stretch out like large splashes of green all over the countryside, that are quick to beguile the casual observer. Then there are the majestic contours of the Rocky Mountains themselves, that will command your utmost respect and wondrous awe. For these majestic, voluptuous mountains, masterpieces of nature, that artists so often come here to paint on canvas, rise and fall before you, under a powder blue Wyoming sky, and you realize in the grand scheme of things how very small and inconspicuous you really are, as you observe herds of buffaloes and elk roaming the plains. The visitors that come here are stunned by the grand scale of the state, and how big everything is here, and for the residents that have made Wyoming their forever home, when they leave the state to travel elsewhere or even go abroad, it's natural for them to feel claustrophobic, for they are used to being surrounded by an eternity of space. So booming cities and contained spaces can feel almost alien to them. Living in this western part of Wyoming has been described by many very aptly as being as free as an eagle, stretching out its powerful mighty wings as the bird navigates the skies. And for many people living here, it's not hard to have a love affair with the natural world, for the beguiling views that paint a colourful canvas over the countryside have enchanted so many, and not many can be accused of tiring of the prepossessing views that greet them every day when they rise from their sweet slumber. Alas, during this relentless, unmerciful heat wave, none of the locals were talking about Wyoming's beauty, for few were smiling, as the heat relentlessly pummelled them, as if they were in a boxing ring, having all the energy sucked out of them by a powerful opponent, so much more intimidating than they were. Let's not kid. Who can stand up to the fierce ferocity of a sun that has turned its temperature up to full blast, as the sun had done for the last 3 weeks or so? And it seemed like this insufferable sauna would never end, as if the man managing the beauty spa simply had forgotten to turn the thermostat right down. Clarissa's mother, known to the locals as Nancy Pearson, was holding her 8-year-old daughter's hand as they marched down the sidewalk together towards Beryl's ice cream parlour to buy ice cream, while the sun thrust its beams down on them so fiercely, with bright bursts of searing hot light. Both mother and daughter were wearing floral sundresses with cowboy boots on their feet, as they sashayed down the sidewalk. Ostensibly, if you weren't wearing shoes, you'd lightly have fried the soles of your feet, as that was how fearsome the heat had become. Mrs. Pearson noticed that the beautiful flowers that were tumbling out of large keg barrels outside some of the local shops were looking miserably wilted and forlorn, as if they too were battling to cope with the searing temperatures. Outside every shop in town, people had generously placed out big bowls of water for the dogs to enjoy a cooling drink. Nancy Pearson believed everybody deserved ice cream in scorching, insufferable weather as formidable as this, and a long queue of like-minded people appeared to have gathered in line to buy ice cream outside Beryl's ice cream shop, for everybody had the same idea on their mind, and cooling off was the order of the day, for nothing beats ice cream to lift your disenfranchised spirit and fight off the heat. "Oh, hello there," said the young man standing behind the ice cream counter, whom 8-year-old Clarissa had never seen before. Maybe he'd been recruited by Beryl Bonnet for extra work during the summer, because Beryl's ice cream parlour had to be doing a booming trade in this heat, and was probably the only business in Wyoming thriving, as it was all Clarissa thought about when she woke up and went to bed at night, were bowls and bowls of creamy ice cream. Clarissa liked the look of the young man behind the counter, who wore a name tag on his customary pink and white striped apron, which read Ben Fuller. He must be new in town, she thought to herself. She'd never seen him before a day in her life. She rather liked his lopsided smile and cute dimples on both sides of his cheeks. Ben was gesturing to the vast display of deliciously creamy ice cream on offer, of which there were so many irresistibly tempting flavours to choose from. "What flavour would you like, ma'am?" the young man called Ben asked Clarissa's mother.
Would you like a cone or a cup? May I be so bold as to suggest a cup in this heat is a lot more manageable, unless you can eat a cone very quickly, because the ice cream melts so fast."
"We'll both be having cups," said Clarissa's mother, very decisively. Clarissa's neat little nose was smudging the glass counter as she peered in at all the ice creams, with an expression of unbridled enthusiasm on her cherubic face. She was an adorable-looking child with ringlets of bouncy blonde hair and eyes so very blue, sometimes people wondered if they were actually real. Clarissa wore her heart on her sleeve and spoke so honestly about her opinions over everything, but the only time her tongue was tied was when she was around her father Tristan, who was a travelling salesman, and when he was away things were so much better at home, the air always lighter, everything far more settled. But when Tristan Pearson arrived home, the atmosphere always became tense, and Mrs. Pearson would run around her husband like a butler attending to an earl, almost as if she was afraid of upsetting him. Tristan Pearson was a bear of a man, who was over 6 foot tall, with ponderously big shoulders, and if the truth be told, he never did pay much attention to his daughter Clarissa, almost as if he viewed her as rather annoying. He possessed those stereotype old-fashioned views towards children, and thought it was so much better that they were seen and not heard. Clarissa, like many other small child her age, longed for the approval of her father, but it was hard to come by, when he gave the family cat more attention than he ever did his own daughter. The cat could be quite nasty when he lashed out at you, if he was in a defiant mood, that is, and Clarissa's father seemed to be enchanted by the cat's stroppiness. Perhaps he saw himself in the cat, which was why he liked him so much. Clarissa adored ice cream. I mean, what right-thinking little girl like her did not? It was very hard to choose an ice cream flavour when they all looked so very good. She was beginning to salivate as she imagined the icy creamy coolness of that ice cream on her tongue, soothingly sliding down her throat and cooling down her entire body.
"What flavour do you want, Clarissa, love?" her mum asked her. "You can only have 3 scoops of ice cream, no more than that, because you might not eat your dinner tonight, and we can't have that, can we?"
"I'll have 1 scoop of the strawberry, please, 1 of cookie dough, and I'll have the chocolate cherry," said Clarissa, watching the young man load up their cups with magnanimous scoops of creamy ice cream. Clarissa was secretly delighted that this man was so generous, when Mrs. Bonnet, who ran the ice cream parlour, with a smile of sufficiency and a degree of insouciance towards her customers, was far too thrifty for Clarissa's liking, and more interested in lining her cash register with plenty of money than people's stomachs with ice cream. Let's just say when the hungry hopefuls gathered behind the ice cream counter at Beryl's ice cream parlour, the woman measured everything up so precisely, so you always walked away feeling rather hard done by, as if you'd been cheated. But this young man, who went by the name of Ben Fuller, seemed to have made the scoops of ice cream extra big today, and Clarissa was very appreciative about that, and she could not help but give the young man an extra big smile, by way of saying thank you. Ben gave Clarissa a big wink in response, as he handed Clarissa her big cup of ice cream, where all 3 flavours were piled up like a mountain of creaminess, waiting to be gobbled up.
"What do you say to this very nice man, Clarissa?"
"Thank you, Ben," said Clarissa. Clarissa's mother Nancy had chosen for herself 3 sophisticated grown-up flavours, 1 scoop of pistachio ice cream, 1 scoop tiramisu, and 1 scoop of decadent chocolate truffle. She pulled out some money from her tapestry purse and told the young man to keep the change.
"I haven't seen you around here before,"
she inquired curiously, as when a stranger arrived in town, everyone was interested in learning about the new arrival, as they didn't get too many visitors to their small town, so new people were always a talking point.
"That's because I'm not from these parts, ma'am. I'm from Nebraska, believe it or not. It's over 7 hours away from here, so it's not too large a stretch in terms of travel. I'm Mrs. Bonnet's nephew. She's my mother's older sister," Ben explained. "My aunt asked me to come up here for the summer, as with a heat like this, she's been run off her feet with the ice cream parlour, She says the hot weather has made her do a booming trade. Business has been great for her at the moment. She's getting orders even for home deliveries. So she begged my mother to rope me in to help her, as she can't manage on her own." "I bet your aunt is extremely grateful to have all your help," said Nancy, taking the ice cream cups from the nice young man. "I'm not surprised the business is booming." "You bet it's booming," said Ben. "I've been rushed off my feet, I have. Some people have been coming here twice a day for ice cream, and even my aunt says that's a first." "I can't say I'm remotely surprised about that," said Nancy. "I would live in the ice cream parlour if I'd been given a choice. It's delightfully cool in here, but I guess my waistline would not thank me for it. I've got the kind of husband that notices if I even put on 2 inches, and he won't fail to mention it either. But do you know what? I don't care. So what if I put on a little weight? That's what I say. I'm going to enjoy all this ice cream, every single mouthful." The young man grinned. "That's the spirit, ma'am. But by the looks of things, you're very slender. So if your husband's complaining about your waistline, I think he needs his eyes adjusting. Let's just say when my aunt first started the ice cream shop, she was a string bean, you know. She put on over 100 pounds since she started up the business. And I know it's due to the copious amounts of ice cream she eats. But by right she should be the size of a beluga whale. She has to taste all the new flavours, you see, and every year she grows a little bigger. My uncle's not best pleased about it, and like your husband, he's not the type to keep his thoughts to himself. I'm afraid my uncle, well, he can be quite cutting and offensive with his rude remarks, if you know what I mean. Sometimes I feel quite sorry for my aunt. The other day he called her obese. My aunt refused to talk to him for 3 days, she was so upset. "Well, I'm glad I don't have your aunt's job. And for the record, Beryl is not obese. You can tell her husband that from me. And yes, he is being rude calling her that. Personally, if I had to taste all the ice cream in the shop, I'd be rolling out of the door myself. So considering she stands around all these tempting trays of creamy ice cream every day, that you could only imagine eating, I think in the circumstances she's in excellent shape. Tell her to take no notice of that cruel husband of hers. Life is far too short to get strangled by the small stuff. That's what I always say." "I will tell her you said that," said Ben. He handed Nancy her cup of ice cream. "You've chosen well, if you don't mind my saying so. Pistachio is my absolute favourite. This one is an authentic Italian recipe my aunt sneakily got from an ice cream parlour in Tuscany. She surreptitiously got the owner completely drunk, and then he divulged the secret to his age-old family recipe. Goodness gracious me, your aunt is very shrewd. I don't think I'd have the balls to do a thing like that. Hats off to Beryl." "Yes, what is it, love?" said Nancy, turning around to her daughter. "What did you want to say, Clarissa?" "I just wanted to say, Ben, that you're much nicer than your aunt. Because your aunt is so mean. She only gives small scoops of ice cream, but you give big scoops, so you're very nice, Ben." "Honestly, Clarissa, don't be rude to Ben about his aunt. It's not a very kind thing for you to say." "But it's true, Mummy. Ben is really nice. He gives very big scoops of ice cream. Beryl is mean. She gives small scoops." Nancy Pearson looked apologetic as she smiled at Ben. "I'm very sorry about my daughter's rude outburst, Ben. She didn't mean to be unkind about your aunt, I'm most sure. But you know what children are like. They say exactly what they think, without any filter. And I'm still getting used to it, and I'm her mother. My daughter never holds back anything, I have to say." Ben waved a hand in front of his face. "Forget it. Everybody knows my aunt is as tight as an old boot, so I don't take offence at all. Enjoy your ice creams, ma'am," he said, giving Clarissa a wink. Armed with their ice creams, Clarissa and her mother happily trotted over towards a table in the far corner of the ice cream shop. It was covered with a red and white gingham tablecloth, like all the other tables. They chose a table where they could watch the passers-by on the street corner,
as they tucked into their ice creams. Clarissa was glad, even at 8 years old, to get the weight off her small feet, and to be seated at a table where she could savour the ice cream and enjoy eating it as slowly as possible, so that it would last for as long as it possibly could. She had always learnt to eat things very slowly when you wanted to savour the taste. She was appreciating the coolness of the creamy deliciousness melting on her tongue and sliding down her throat like a fluffy cloud. There really was nothing better in this world than enjoying ice cream, and Clarissa liked the flavours she had chosen, but the strawberry flavour was the best, so she ate the pink scoop twice as slowly as the other two, to make it last for as long as possible. The ice cream parlour was abuzz with people all realising that taking the weight off their feet in this unrelentless heat wave was an excellent idea, so every single table was occupied. People looked as if they were beat up and tired. Bags hung haphazardly across chairs, and shopping bags sat sloppily on the floor with gaping mouths, as if their contents were close to spilling out. But no one seemed to care a jot about the withered state of their shopping. People looked genuinely fatigued. Most were wearing tank tops, denim shorts, and some were wearing cowboy hats and boots, while they eagerly tucked into their ice creams. Clarissa laughed as 2 dogs lay flat on the floor, absolutely exhausted and deflated by the heat. She pointed them out to her mother, who told her they looked exactly how she felt. Both dogs had been given a generous bowl of vanilla ice cream by Ben on the house. Clarissa was right about him. He was very nice. She wished he manned the ice cream parlour every single day, so that she and her mother could get huge scoops of ice cream. She knew only too well that Mrs. Bonnet would never dream of giving any visiting dogs free ice cream, and if she had any notion that her nephew was doing so liberally, she wouldn't be best pleased with him. Maybe she'd send him packing straight back to Nebraska, with his tail between his legs. The 2 dogs in the ice cream parlour Clarissa knew very well. She met them often enough on the sidewalk, when they were being walked by their respective owners. She'd often stopped to pat them, as Clarissa loved animals of every kind, and had begged her father for a golden retriever puppy, but her father had never committed himself to any promises. The black Labrador was called Araminta. He was owned by Blanche and Victor Reeson, a very nice couple in their early 60s. The other dog, an English bulldog, was called Max. He was owned by an old lady called Hope Tobias. Clarissa had no idea how old the woman was. Both dogs hungrily gobbled up their ice cream and looked up at Ben as if he was their new best friend. When Ben observed Clarissa looking up at him as he handed the dogs bowls of ice cream, he made an amusing gesture to Clarissa that suggested he was saying, "Don't tell my aunt about this." He then made that slit-throat gesture, and Clarissa giggled to herself. She knew he was saying to her, "If my Aunt Beryl knew about this, she would kill me. So this better be our secret." Clarissa nodded her head in agreement, and Ben gave her another wink. "Hello over there. Fancy catching the both of you together like this. What a delightful surprise," said Mrs. Clarence, her sing-song voice breaking through the tranquil silence, rather like a knife slicing through butter. She had appeared so abruptly from nowhere, with a bowl overflowing with ice cream. Clarissa counted she had 6 scoops, all in different flavours, in her cup. It really wasn't fair. Some people had all the luck. One day, when Clarissa was fully grown, she'd walk into an ice cream parlour and order ice cream in every single flavour, so much of it that she'd be able to float on her own ice cream cloud, like one of the white fluffy clouds in the Wyoming sky, and sail away on all that delicious creamy goodness, like a bird on the wind. She wished with all her heart her mother would let her have 6 scoops of ice cream, but that would never happen, not even on her birthday, which was 2 days away, as her mother did not like Clarissa to eat too much sugar. She said it might make Clarissa fat one day, and break out in all kinds of spots. Mrs. Clarence swooped down towards their table like a hungry vulture, descending on a meaty carcass. Nancy Pearson inwardly groaned as their neighbour approached the table. Bang goes the restful quietness of the day, she thought, as when Mrs. Clarence arrived on the scene, the talking would invariably start, and seemingly never stop. The woman had earned the reputation in town of being a bit of a gas bag, and in the dreadful heat like this, both Nancy Pearson and her daughter Clarissa didn't feel like talking very much. Nancy Clarissa's mother once described Mrs. Clarence as absolutely exhausting. "That woman can talk the ears off a dog," her mother had said. Clarissa did agree that Mrs. Clarence could talk a lot, but she didn't believe anyone could possibly talk the ears off a dog. She'd never heard of that happening before, and doubted it was a real condition, even though her mother seemed to think it was. Mrs. Clarence lived in the farmhouse next door to their farmhouse, but both farmhouses nestled on sizable properties of land, fringed by groves of tall lofty pine trees, backed by rolling hills, and the imposing silhouettes of the mountains that cast their distinguished signatures across the sky, that could never be forgotten or overlooked. "Oh, hello, Candace," said Nancy, looking up at Mrs. Clarence with a polite smile on her face. "Fancy seeing you here," she said, feigning surprise herself. But more often than not, on a trip to town, in weather like this, you could pretty much guarantee you'd find Mrs. Clarence hanging around the ice cream parlour, tucking into large volumes of ice cream. Even Beryl Bonnet, who owned the parlour, described Mrs. Clarence as her most prized customer. It was clear Mrs. Clarence loved ice cream, and simply couldn't get enough of it. Nancy had been quite astounded when she'd opened up Mrs. Clarence's freezer once, when looking after the family dogs for the couple, while they were out of town for a few days, and to her amazement she had counted over 200 tubs of ice cream in the freezer, which had taken her quite aback. How much ice cream did Mrs. Clarence actually eat, she had wondered. Mrs. Clarence owned 2 rotund dogs. They were both brother and sister. The female was called Esther, the male Domino. They were a cross between a Weimaraner and Rhodesian Ridgeback, and were extremely good-looking dogs, if they weren't so overweight. But they were also incredibly lazy, and liked to hang around Mrs. Clarence all day long, following her wherever she went. Mrs. Clarence was a soft touch when it came to her beloved dogs, so she lightly spoilt them rotten. And who knows, Clarissa thought, how much ice cream those dogs got through during the summer months. She thought if she were to come back in another lifetime as a dog, she'd choose to be Mrs. Clarence's dog, that was for sure. "You don't mind if I share a table with the both of you?" asked Mrs. Clarence. She made a beeline for one of the chairs at the table, which she pulled out from under the table. The chair made a loud screech, as it scratched rather loudly on the linoleum floor, but no one appeared to notice, as the buzz of people's happy chatter in the parlour drowned out the less friendly noise. Mrs. Clarence plumped herself down on her chair with an agreeable sigh of relief, as if getting the weight off her feet was as glorious as wallowing in a warm, scented bubble bath. "But of course you can sit here," said Nancy. "How have you been doing, Candace? I don't think I've seen you for quite a while. Actually, it's been a couple of weeks, has it not? It feels like an awfully long time." "How has anybody been doing, Nancy, I ask you?" said Candace. "I mean, we live in the mountains, for goodness sake. But we still haven't escaped this excruciatingly hot weather, have we? I can't do anything at the moment. The heat has absolutely drained me of all my energy. I mean, have you ever experienced heat like this? I ask you." "Oh, I agree wholeheartedly, Candace. Wyoming can get hot, but this is the worst I've known it. The other day I was actually wishing it was winter. That's a first for me, let me tell you," Nancy replied. For a moment even Mrs. Clarence appeared to be lost for words, as she tucked hungrily into the ice cream, and Clarissa watched her as she thrust oversized spoonfuls into her mouth. No wonder she'd ordered so many scoops of ice cream, Clarissa thought. I'm surprised she can taste any of it. She's eating it so fast. Ice cream is meant to be savoured, but Mrs. Clarence barreled through the ice cream at the speed of a rocket. She was not a slim woman by any manner of means, although she professed to have been on all the diets known to man, until one day Mrs. Clarence told everyone who would listen that she was never going on a diet ever again, because it made life completely miserable, and Clarissa would agree with that. She had decided that if she ever grew to be as big and cuddly as Mrs. Clarence, she would never ever go on a diet. The thought of being deprived of the good things in life, most especially strawberry ice cream, was too deplorable to ever contemplate. She had seen her mother Nancy go on a diet once, when she'd eaten hard-boiled eggs for an entire week, and Clarissa had seen how miserable her mother had become. She'd also become incredibly snappy. And on the day her mother finished her diet, she'd baked a big chocolate cake for the family, but unfortunately gobbled down the whole thing because she was so hungry, and there were no crumbs even left for Clarissa to enjoy, which had been such a bummer. "Ah, I do feel so much better," said Mrs. Clarence, fumbling around in a purse to bring out a tissue, to pat the perspiration away from her brow. "Oh, I have got a bit of brain freeze, though. I do rather suspect I ate the ice cream a little fast. Never mind. I've been sweating like a pig in this heat," she said. "This heat is such a killer. I heard on the news the other day 3 people died of heat stroke. Can you believe that? They've been warning people not to go out in the sun, at midday most especially. If you're old and frail, you really need to avoid the sun. But I'm afraid some people never listen, do they?" "Oh, I heard about that on the local news," said Nancy. "It's so dreadfully sad. But you do need to keep hydrated in weather like this, don't you? It can be very dangerous if you don't. I make certain I drink plenty of water in weather like this. Sometimes I even add some salt to the water. They do say that helps a lot." "Oh, do they? Well, I should try that then. Would you believe it, Nancy? My mother very nearly died of the heat the other day," said Mrs. Clarence, sounding aggrieved. "Honestly, that mother of mine, she is the absolute end. Who in their right mind goes into the scorching backyard at the hottest time of the day to plant tomato seedlings, I ask you? I mean, have you ever?" "I don't know who to feel more sorry for, my mother or the tomato seedlings that all died from the extreme heat, I hasten to say. If you're going to plant something, even I know that the hottest time of the day to lay down seedlings is probably not the best idea. But try telling that to my obstinately stubborn mother, who has a mind of her own, and if she wants to do something, even the devil can't stop her." "Goodness gracious me! Is that what she did?" asked Nancy, looking astounded. "Your mother is in her 70s, isn't she? She should be looking after herself better, especially in heat like this. What on earth is she doing planting seedlings in your yard in the scorching heat? Apart from anything else, that's asking for the seedlings to die. I have not got green fingers, but I know that." "Good question, Nancy. I'm afraid I wish I knew the answer to that question. But my mother is a law unto herself, as they say." "How do you know that your mother nearly died?" asked Clarissa, her blue eyes fixing on Mrs. Clarence with a curious intrigue. She found it rather hard to believe that something as innocent as the sun could kill you. But then again, it really had been very hot of late, and Clarissa had struggled to sleep at night. "Well, dear, my mother nearly dropped down dead in the heat of the midday sun," said Mrs. Clarence, shrugging her shoulders. "At least she had the good grace to admit that she went faint and rather dizzy and passed out. It's a long story, I'm afraid. I hasten to say, since then, she's never been right in the head. After she spent that time in the sun, I'm quite sure she got a touch of sunstroke or something. It can do funny things to your head, you know. She's been spouting all this nonsense ever since. Let's just say the things that are coming out of her mouth, well, they're absolutely ludicrous. My husband believes my mother's going senile. Personally, I think it's the sun that's affected her cognitive function, if you know what I mean. Of course, since the event, she's descended into a dreadful sulk, as no one is buying a single word of what she's saying. I think the heat has affected her brain. But don't tell her I told you that. She'll be mortified." "Well, what exactly happened to your mother?" asked Nancy, looking rather concerned. She'd liked Mrs. Clarence's mother. She was an eccentric old lady who dressed in bright flashy colours and really rather overdid her make-up, so that her eyebrows and lipstick were highly exaggerated, and she wore far too much blush on her cheeks. But the woman always had a great sense of humour.
"Well, I was taking a much-needed nap in the afternoon. I was completely exhausted. The heat wave completely sapped my energy.
It wasn't doing me any good trying to get sleep at night, especially since my husband doesn't appreciate any air conditioning in our bedroom. He says it's not good for our health to sleep with it on all the time, but I disagree. Anyway, I went into the kitchen to rehydrate myself because I was desperately thirsty. I decided to look in on my mother to check she was all right and to see if she wanted a nice cold glass of iced tea. I got the shock of my life, you know, when I discovered my mother wasn't in our farmhouse. I'm sure you've noticed that she's a very feeble woman, not in the very best of health. She's on all manner of medications, but the less said about that, the better. Well, I practically lost it with my husband, didn't I, when I asked him where my mother was. My husband was reading a paper nonchalantly in the air-conditioned living room, would you believe? He doesn't mind sitting in a cool room, but refuses to sleep in one, if you can make any sense of that at all, because I certainly can't. He very casually said to me, "Oh, your mother is planting tomato seedlings in the yard." If it was the most normal thing to do in sizzling weather like this. I practically lost it with him, I'm afraid. I said to him, "You mean to say you have let my mother go out in the scorching hot sunshine to plant tomato seedlings at the worst possible time of the day? Are you absolutely insane, Rolf? Why the hell did you not stop her? You know planting any stuff in this heat is nonsensical. My mother's got a delicate constitution. It doesn't help that she burns easily with her fair skin." "Nothing wrong with planting a few tomatoes, love," my husband said innocently. I'm telling you, Nancy, I wanted to go up and strangle his neck, especially when he admitted that my poor mother had not even been wearing a hat. "Nothing wrong? Are you kidding me? You might be all nice and cool sitting here so lackadaisically in the living room," I said, "reading your paper, Rolf. But my mother is fragile. You let her go out in this weather. Haven't you heard the advice on the radio? It's been warning people to stay indoors during the hottest time of the day. They don't dish out this advice willy-nilly. 3 people have died in this heat wave, Rolf." "Oh, for goodness sake, love, keep your knickers on, will you? Stop being so damn dramatic. There's nothing wrong with keeping busy. It's good for your mother to be a bit industrious. You should be encouraging her, not sabotaging her good efforts to do something nice for us. We could do with some beds of tomatoes, and these are the Italian kind you use in pasta dishes. I don't care, Rolf, if these tomatoes grow in the Andes or the North Pole, but I do care about my mother, Rolf. What the hell were you thinking? I rely on you to watch her for me when I'm otherwise engaged. But I can see you haven't even given her a fleeting thought. Shame on you. Have you any idea how hot it is out there?" I was out of the farmhouse as fast as a whippet, I have to tell you, Nancy. "And what I did find," said Mrs. Clarence, opening her eyes up so wide that Clarissa thought she looked like the wise old owl she'd read about in her storybooks. "What did you find?" asked Nancy. "Oh, God, I think I know what you're going to say. Your poor mother had passed out from the sun. You found her lying in a crumpled heap. You thought she was dead. Is that what you found?" "Not exactly. Near enough, you could say," said Mrs. Clarence. "In truth, I found no sign of my mother anywhere, but all the tomato seedlings she had planted were lying there on the ground outside the flower bed, roots all exposed, leaves wilted, and completely dead. They were beyond reviving." "Goodness gracious," said Nancy. "It must have been a scorcher. Where on earth was your mother?" "That's it. I couldn't find her anywhere. I began to panic." I managed to get my husband out of his chair. It was like raising the living dead, I have to tell you. He was totally nonchalant about my mother's disappearance. I don't mind admitting I wanted to throttle him by this stage. All he had to do was to tell my mother to not plant the seedlings and to wait until early in the morning. Not venture out in the middle of the day like that. But he did nothing of the kind. He was so caught up in reading the newspaper, I think. I urged him to help me look for her, but she was nowhere to be found, and we were both absolutely mystified as to where she'd got to. It would have been quite a walk for her to cross the field on her own and go into those woods in the searing heat. But it was the only place I thought she could possibly be. You hear of people, don't you, when they've had hypothermia in fiercely cold conditions, actually throwing off their clothes, as irrational as that may sound, but they suddenly believe they're incredibly hot, and as a consequence they absolutely freeze to death. It accelerates the freezing process, does it not? Something happens to the brain, doesn't it? People become somewhat delusional. I thought maybe the heat had done a similar thing to my mother, and she had aimlessly just wandered off into the woods and lost all sense of her bearings. And had she? Asked Nancy, raising a brow. Well, at least if she was in the woods, she'd likely have been shaded by all the trees there, which should have offered her considerable relief from the heat of the day, I would imagine. Well, I'm getting there, said Mrs. Clarence, clearly determined to tell Nancy and Clarissa the entire story, from start to finish, not sparing them any of the details. But that was Mrs. Clarence for you all over. She loved the details when it came to a story, and she was thoroughly enjoying telling this one, especially as both Clarissa and Nancy were focused on her every word, as if her story had grabbed their undivided attention, and they were holding their breaths as to what she would actually say next. Mrs. Clarence always liked an audience, even if it happened to be a small one. Well, me and my husband got onto the ATV as fast as we possibly could. We drove into the woods at a fast speed, hoping with all our hearts we would find my mother. I don't mind admitting to you, Nancy, that my heart was pounding violently in my chest at a dime to a dozen as we entered those woods. I was so desperately worried about my mother's condition. I was also very angry with my husband for his irresponsibility in allowing my mother out in the sun like that. I mean, what the hell was the man thinking? My mother can be bloody-minded when she wants to be. Sometimes she really needs to be reined in. If those tomato seedlings were suffocating from the heat, what had become of her? Those were my only thoughts. I think I was crossing my fingers and dotting my toes that I'd find my mother in one piece, but I wasn't actually sure that I would. But you did find her, I hope, asked Nancy. We found her all right. Lo and behold, there she was, lying on a bed of leaves by the side of the creek, with her clothes soaked to the skin, looking terribly pleased with herself. This time, instead of wanting to throttle my father, it was my mother's neck I wanted to wring. She should never have been out in the sun like that. Now here she was, soaked to the skin, her clothes absolutely saturated with water. She must have taken a dip in the creek. She was insouciantly lying on the creek's rather rugged bank, as happy as Larry, I have to say, not remotely concerned about the angst and chaos that she had caused. "Ma'am," I cried out, "we've been so worried about you. What are you doing here by the creek? How did you manage to walk across such a big field to get here on your own? You're not a very strong woman. You're very feeble. You know it's dangerous to do that. You're not as strong as you used to be, and this heat is a killer." My mother just looked at me, so relaxed, as if everything was all perfectly fine. She said, "He said you'd come for me, that I was to wait here for you, and keep myself cool by the creek. He took me into the water, you know. He carried me like a baby in his arms." She giggled, you know. "The cold water, it woke me up. I got the shock of my life when I woke up. I must have passed out from the heat. I thought I was dreaming, you know. He was so big, but very nice, very kind. He said if he hadn't rescued me, I'd be a goner by now. I think he's right, you know. Everything went so black, so very black. I don't remember anything until I was in the water. What a relief it was, too. I was so hot.
So very hot. What are you talking about, Mother? You are making no sense at all. You're talking in riddles. You're not making any sense at all. I think you're a bit delirious. Who is this man you're referring to? Whereabouts is he? My mother just shrugged her shoulders. He's not here any more. He's gone, hasn't he? But he was here a while back. He brought me here. Such a very nice gentleman. Such nice eyes. So much hair. Lots of hair. Very hairy he was. Ma'am, what is going on with you? Why are you talking like this? You're not making any sense at all. Who is this man you're talking about? What is his name? My mother looked at me as if she thought I was the one that was a dimwit for asking her. A very sensible question, I thought. My husband was obviously rolling his eyes in the back of his head in absolute exasperation. I think he thought my mother was embarking down the journey of senility, maybe going through the first stages down that path. And maybe he's right. I honestly don't know, Nancy. I know very little about mental health. But I will say this. I had quite the shock to find my mother drenched to the skin, lying by the creek in the woods, waiting with so much expectation for me and my husband to pick her up. It was all very bizarre.
I must admit, said Nancy, cupping her face in her hands, that's quite some story, Mrs. Clarence. What did your mum say happened when she was planting those tomato seedlings? How did she manage to walk across the field to the woods and make it that way? It's quite a long walk across that field, especially in the heat of the day. It makes no sense that she could accomplish that. Your mother's pretty frail at the best of times, and for her to be on her feet like that makes no sense to me. I doubt she'd have the strength to make that walk. She must have had some kind of help, surely. Maybe there really was a man who assisted her, although in this sequestered part of the world I have no idea who he'd be, because we don't exactly run into random strangers around here, do we? Of course there was no random stranger, Nancy, running into my mother. You're beginning to sound like her now. Of course there was no man. There simply couldn't have been. That would have been absolutely impossible. You're probably right, Nancy agreed. It's just what you're telling me. Well, it just doesn't add up. I feel as if I'm standing over a jigsaw puzzle and trying to force the pieces together, but they simply won't fit.
Join the club, Nancy. I've been going over and over this in my mind. So has my husband, for that matter. My mother has since gone into a dreadfully big sulk. She's refusing to talk to the both of us about the matter any more. She's completely shut down. She claims I think she's going absolutely hopping mad. She says it did happen, and she's not delusional, and she doesn't want to speak to me about this ever again. She's reverted to becoming like an insolent teenager, you could say. She was saying I don't believe anything she says, because I think she's losing her mind and going senile. What did you say to that? What could I say, Nancy? Because she's absolutely right. I'm afraid that is what I've been thinking, although, of course, it has occurred to me that maybe that stint she spent in the sun did something to her brain, just like it does when you're very, very cold. That's the only other explanation I can come to.
Well, what exactly happened when she planted those tomato seedlings? Did she tell you how she ended up in the woods?
Well, she said she'd been planting the tomato seedlings in the yard and suddenly became incredibly aware of how hot it was. She said she had the sense that somebody was watching her, but nobody was there, so she felt rather foolish about that. Now she believes the kind man was watching her and became incredibly worried and disquieted that she was working in the heat. He immediately came to her rescue, like an angel from heaven. Those were the words she used. Don't speak to me about them. I don't think she realized how over-the-top and nonsensical her story sounds. She claims she became terribly faint and light-headed, very dizzy, she said. She suddenly blacked out, toppled over on the ground, and luckily didn't appear to have hurt herself. which in itself is a bit of a miracle, because my mother can be clumsy at the very best of times without wishing to be unkind. She remembered nothing until she claimed she found herself in this big man's arms, being held in the cooling water. Some water was being placed in her mouth, which she said she swallowed. She said the man was making strange, encouraging noises and speaking in a peculiar language. She thinks he might have been German, but she's not very sure about that. At first she thought it was all a dream and that she was imagining it, but then she said he was definitely very real. She's most insistent about this. But I'm sorry, Nancy. I don't believe a word of it, and nor does my husband. I'm just sorry, I don't. She's talking absolute nonsense. I looked up heat stroke on the net, you know. It confirmed my very worst fears. Apparently heat stroke can give you abnormal mental status, delirium and slurred speech, a little like if you're drunk. My mother was behaving exactly like that. As I was saying, the symptoms are not unsimilar to what happens to you on the opposite end of the spectrum when you're suffering from hypothermia. It would seem that both conditions can make you delusional and even, hallucinate. I understand where you're going with this, Mrs. Clarence, I really do, and I appreciate everything you've been saying. But your mother is a very frail woman. She uses a walking stick to get around. It would have been physically impossible for her to cross that rugged field, to enter the woods and to get to the creek. It makes no sense at all. Surely she couldn't have got there on her own. Not in this sweltering heat, I'm afraid. You know what I think, Nancy, dear. I'm afraid she did just that. Now, I've heard of people with hypothermia walking over great distances, stripped of their clothes, virtually naked. They pass out and eventually die. Maybe the same thing happens when you're incredibly hot. Well, if the truth be told, I think she walked across the field to the woods, against all the odds, as strange as it may sound. Then she plunged into the water at the creek, and that water probably saved her life. It was the best thing she could have done because it cooled her down at once. Ostensibly, I think she was hallucinating about this man in her head. She claims he was so tall he would have been bigger than the front door. I mean, have you ever heard anything so preposterous in all your entire life? A man who's bigger than your front door. That just does not happen. Anyway, what can I say? Said Mrs. Clarence, rolling her eyes in exasperation. I'm telling you, Nancy, my mother's not right in the head at the moment. She doggedly refuses to admit that what she's saying is not making any sense at all. But then again, my mother's always been like that, you know. Never admits she's wrong about anything. I mean, when she was a girl, they were saying avoid eggs at all costs because they will ruin your cholesterol. But now the science has changed in that regard. We are told these days how good eggs are for our health. But my mother still doggedly believes they're very bad news. She refuses to change her opinion in that matter. She's always been like that. Well, I don't think any of this really matters, Mrs. Clarence. The main thing is your mother's all right. And at the end of the day, that is all that matters. Oh, she's all right, that's for sure. She's back to her usual cranky self, Nancy. And, of course, on top of it all, sulking all the time, because I refuse to believe her story. Honestly, Nancy, she's been driving me crazy with all this fictitious stuff that she's been spinning. I just wish she'd be bold enough to admit that she walked to the creek herself. But she's been delusional. Why don't you call me Candace, love? You did in the beginning, and now you're calling me Mrs. Clarence. Oh, I'm sorry about that, Candace. I really am. But don't worry about any of this. I really mean it. The main thing is your mother's absolutely fine. But she must be careful and not keep going out into the sun like this. We have no idea how long this heat wave is going to last. It's not good for her. She needs to be more vigilant. I did see her recently, though. It must have been 3 weeks ago in church. We had a long conversation together. She seemed to be in sound mind to me. So if she's a little off-centre at the moment, well, let's not kid. The heat is getting us all down at the moment.
My husband travels around in his car, and I've never known him to be snappy. Well, not as snappy as he is at the moment. The heat doesn't bring out the best in us, I'm afraid. It makes us, well, not very nice to be around, I rather suspect. It certainly does that to me. You know, Nancy, you are the voice of reason. I think you are absolutely right. The same could be said about our household at the moment. I'm always bitching at my husband about the lack of air conditioning in our bedroom. He claims I want to sleep in a refrigerator. Maybe I do, but what's wrong with that? If the truth be told, we've all been at each other's throats recently. And the hot weather is to blame for most of this. You're right about that. What an extraordinary story, Nancy privately thought to herself, when she finally said her goodbyes to Mrs. Clarence, who she knew infinitely preferred to be called Candace, but she often forgot to call her by her first name. She and her daughter headed back to the farmhouse in her SUV. But little did Nancy realize that by the following morning, after a night that she'd never forget, when the most horrible nightmare would come to revelation, that she'd learn that Mrs. Clarence's mother was not going senile, and the hairy man who'd saved her in the searing heat was very real indeed. She'd also learned something so dreadfully disturbing that it would ultimately change the course of her life forever, in just a few hours, when things would never ever be the same again. But out of this chaotic devastation would be the dawning of new hope and a much better life. But she would soon learn a whole lot more about the mysterious hairy stranger that resided in the woods, who would ultimately be responsible for ending the first flames of a great evil that had just been birthed, and could grow out of control like a raging fire that you couldn't put out if it wasn't stopped in time. Nancy really did like Candace's mother. She was an eccentric woman, not inclined to make up fictitious stories, but heatstroke could probably play tricks on the mind, Nancy gleamed. She was glad the woman had recovered from her fainting spell in the backyard, while she planted tomato seedlings, that by all accounts had turned out to be quite the adventure for her. But how she'd ended up in that wood grove, God only knows. It had certainly left Nancy second-guessing what had really happened to Mrs. Clarence's mother that day. But she reasoned with herself that maybe some mysteries can never be solved. But she was wrong about that. The scorching heat of the Wyoming day seemed to blazingly last forever, as if it had no intention of abating, and so even the short drive from town back to the house had been insufferable, as the SUV's air conditioning unit seemed to be on the blink. And her husband Tristan said it was probably because she overused it so much during the summer months, which was probably true. Nancy left the windows wide open in the car, and the radio on to a station that had turned to static. Nothing appeared to be working in this heat, almost as if even technology had gone on strike and was protesting the weather. Nancy was very glad that her husband Tristan was away on business for a couple of days. If the truth be told, she never enjoyed spending time in his company. She didn't share these clandestine thoughts with any of her girlfriends, who were enviably so happy in their marriages. Sometimes Nancy felt like she'd drawn the short end of the straw. She had married Tristan when she was 19 years old, because she discovered she was pregnant, and her father, who was very old-fashioned at the time, did not want his daughter's baby to be illegitimate. But he need not have worried, for Tristan, on learning about Nancy's news, had insisted the couple got married at once. If the truth be told, Nancy had never loved Tristan, and this was a realization that always bothered her, like an itch that she could never locate, that needed to be scratched. She had always thought with time she might grow to love Tristan, or at the very least like him even just a little bit. But after 12 years of married life, she was not sure the word like could be applied to her husband. Perhaps it was all her fault, she reasoned. Maybe on her part there was an inbuilt resentment that she harboured in her heart for all these years against her husband, for insisting they got married so quickly. "But I don't love you," she had told him. "How can I possibly marry you?"
"You're a pregnant woman. It's not as if we have a choice, is it, Nancy?"
She knew in her heart that if Tristan ever cheated on her or had an affair with another woman, that she wouldn't care a jot. So what did that actually say about the state of her relationship with Tristan? A small part of her would be relieved if she found the perfect excuse to leave the man. When she first met Tristan, in her teens, she was drawn to the tall, larger-than-life, rather debonair man, who appeared to be easy on the eyes, and at the same time seemed to be enveloped in an aura of intriguing mystery, rather like a wrapped-up Christmas present you long to open, because it looks as if it contains something incredibly exciting. But does it? That's the $100 question you have to ask yourself. We've all experienced at one point in time opening up a present that failed to live up to our fanciful expectations, and that was certainly Nancy's story. She'd heard somewhere it was the quiet ones you had to watch. It was true in the grand scheme of things. Nancy did not know Tristan any better than she had done when she first got married to the man. So what did that say about their marriage? She didn't really know what made him tick, and she wasn't even sure she even wanted to know the mechanics of that. If the truth be told, Nancy couldn't help but feel, if she was to find out her husband's secrets, or what was nesting in the muddied nest of her husband's heart, she wasn't sure she'd particularly like what she would see, for there was something about him that rather unsettled her. It was like a sharp tug in her lower guts that occasionally gave her cause for great discomfort. The only way she would describe it, when looking back on those feelings of hers, is she felt a sense of grave disquiet that she couldn't rationalize. In her opinion, Tristan was like a book on the shelf, gathering dust, where the pages are stuck together because someone accidentally spilt egg white on the pages. So even if you wanted to open that book, you can't, because if you try to do so, you'll only succeed in tearing up the pages. She rather suspected that if she did manage to prise those pages very skillfully and very carefully apart to find out what her husband was really about, she would be bitterly disappointed about what she would see. Or worse still, she would find there was nothing on those pages at all. No script, no items of any interest, only a book full of empty pages, one after another. And nothing could be worse than that, or could it? Nancy did not realize that an empty book would be a lot more reassuring than discovering what her husband was really about. For many years she would look back and say, "How could I not have seen it?" But sometimes the monsters that we fear the most live under our very roofs. She had reconciled herself to the fact that in life you couldn't have everything. But when she miscarried the baby she'd been expecting at 19 years old, she regretted her haste in getting married to Tristan before there were any signs of her showing. She should have left it a little longer. She now felt as if she was stuck with Tristan for the rest of her life, as she had taken her marital vows before God incredibly seriously, for better for worse, in sickness and health, until death us do part. Tristan seemed devoid of emotion or sentimentality of any kind. Never once had he ever told Nancy that he loved her, or taken her out to celebrate an anniversary or birthday, nor had he ever bought her a bouquet of flowers or a bottle of perfume or even a box of chocolates. Nancy had secretly wondered if Tristan was capable of loving anyone, apart from the family cat Bosman, who was quite a cranky fellow to say the least, and seemed to be the only creature capable of amusing her husband. Perhaps the cat mirrored aspects of his own personality, and that's why he liked him so much. When Nancy had fallen pregnant for a second time, with Clarissa, she hoped that the birth of her child would be the magic cure that would bring the couple closer together. But that had all been wishful thinking on her part, because in no way did that happen, as Tristan had so little time for Clarissa, and if the truth be told, he gave her no attention at all, or at the very least, very little. Nancy had very painfully observed her 8-year-old daughter trying her level best to win over her father's affections, because she so wanted her father to love her. When her father returned from a couple of days spent at work and away from home, Clarissa would greet him by throwing her arms all over her father, but he'd push her away gently and say, "Not now, Clarissa." Nancy would watch her daughter, reaching out to him. Sometimes she'd draw him a picture, and Tristan would thank his daughter, but then discard the picture in the trash, as if it meant absolutely nothing to him. Nancy knew Clarissa was longing to be acknowledged, validated and appreciated by her father, like every little girl would want. but he didn't seem to have that natural paternal instinct you'd expect a father to have. Nancy had tackled Tristan about the matter again and again, and tried to actively encourage her husband to be more emotionally available to their girl.
"What do you want me to do?" he had asked her.
"I want you to be a father to her, Tristan. Why don't you read her some bedtime stories? Play with her a little. Take her to the creek for a swim. Can't you see she needs you? She really does. She wants you to be there for her. She needs you, Tristan. Every little girl needs a father in her life." To give Tristan his due, he was trying his level best to work on his relationship with his little girl, but it was a struggle for him, and he was only doing it to appease his wife. It was later that afternoon, as Nancy was tossing a garlic-laden vinaigrette dressing into a French salad and putting it on the dinner table in a carved wooden bowl to eat with slices of thick cold ham, pieces of homemade crusty bread, along with glasses of homemade cloudy lemonade, made with fresh lemons that she'd spent the afternoon squeezing. She was about to call Clarissa to tell her that dinner was ready, when her thoughts were rudely interrupted by the noisy, intrusive sound of a car engine rolling down the drive. The clanging sound of the rattling engine came to an abrupt and final halt, followed by the banging sound of a car door being slammed behind itself. Nancy knew the car belonged to her husband Tristan. He drove a monster of an SUV that had a very distinctive sound due to its diesel engine. It was an ugly, macho-looking vehicle that Nancy had never liked. Nancy could feel her heart beginning to sink, like a heavy stone being plunged into a deep body of water. Why did she always feel this bitter disappointment every time Tristan arrived home earlier than expected? It was rather like being told that a thunderstorm had been forecast for the evening ahead. She couldn't be happy to see her husband, like every other wife would invariably be, when their other half returned home from being away. Or were there other women like herself, she wondered, who felt so little connection with their husband, like she did? Tristan had not been expected home until tomorrow evening, so his impromptu arrival was not welcome, especially on a searingly hot day like this, when the heat was really getting her down. So her husband arriving home made her feel a whole lot flatter, almost as if this insufferable day was becoming infinitely more claustrophobic by the second. She could hear the tap of little eager feet bolting on the landing, and then hear her little girl sliding down the banisters like a fireman on his pole. "Daddy's here! Daddy's here!" Clarissa cried out excitedly. It was incredulous that her 8-year-old girl loved her father, even though he was impossible to love, much like their cat Bosman, who was always lashing out at Clarissa with angry talons, and had often given her some nasty scratches that had actually drawn blood. But just like her father, Clarissa's love for the grumpy cat had never waned, not even for a second. Tristan was a very good-looking man. Everybody was telling Nancy that. But these days she was struggling to find his attractiveness, because when she looked at her husband, she felt absolutely nothing. Was it even normal to feel this emotionally redundant and disconnected to the man she was married to? Her husband looked extremely fatigued this afternoon. His wavy chestnut-brown hair appeared slightly ruffled, as if he'd forgotten to comb it earlier on in the morning. He was wearing a very smart pair of navy blue chinos, and a blue and white striped shirt, obviously designer, rolled up at the sleeves. But he did look deflated, as if he'd been in a boxing match and had had all the energy vacuum-suctioned out of him. But then again, did not everybody in Wyoming look this deflated, this discouraged, in such unforgiving heat? She watched him very closely, from a distance, removing his black duffel from the trunk of the car and thrusting the large straps over his shoulders as he marched eagerly to the front door. But there was a decided limp in his left leg that she'd never seen before, as if he'd twisted an ankle or something. She wondered how he'd done that. Nancy heard the keys jingling and the door being thrust open, followed by the delighted chorus of cheers from her daughter Clarissa, ebulliently rushing over to her father to greet him with a warm embrace. "Daddy! Daddy!" Clarissa cried out, throwing her arms around him like a rambunctious, overexcited dog. "Daddy, you're back home! I'm I'm so glad you're back home.
Not now, Clarissa, said Tristan, pushing Clarissa away. I've had a very hard day. It's been a long day on the road. It's very, very hot.
Sorry, Daddy, said Clarissa, pulling away from her father, unable to hide the disappointment on her face.
It's not your fault, Clarissa. It's this god-awful weather. It's driving me absolutely insane. And I've sprained my bloody ankle to boot. So I'm not in the best mood, I'm afraid. It's been a bloody lousy day. The traffic out there has been deplorable. So many people driving like maniacs on the road. Half these bloody people should have their driving licenses revoked. Let me tell you that. Where is your mother?
She's in the kitchen, said Clarissa. Daddy, I drew you a very nice picture. It's of a bird with a very big beak eating lots of worms, because I saw a bird yesterday eating lots of worms, so I copied it for you. Shall I show it to you now, Daddy?
It sounds very nice, Clarissa. You can show it to me later. But right now I need something to drink. I'm dying of thirst. It's a bloody scorcher out there, and I'm as parched as a dried-up old riverbed.
Nancy drew in a deep breath as her husband entered the kitchen. He had left his duffel bag in the entrance hall, which undoubtedly she'd need to unpack for him later.
"Hello, love,"
said Tristan, walking over to Nancy, who was wiping a couple of glasses clean with a tea towel to make them sparkle. Tristan kissed her on the cheek, and then charged over to the large jug of icy lemonade on the kitchen table. The ice jiggled as he poured himself a glass, and refilled it again and again, drinking over 3 glasses of cloudy lemonade in quick succession.
"Oh, that is so good, so refreshing," he said appreciatively. "It's hit the spot."
"You're very thirsty," said Nancy, "and you're home early. This is a surprise, Tristan. Clarissa and I weren't expecting you home until tomorrow evening. I thought you said you needed to visit the Brensons. They were requesting a demonstration from you, were they not, with that brand new Hoover?"
"Change of plan," said Tristan. "I'm home for a couple of days now."
"I'm sure Clarissa's going to be very happy about that, aren't you, Clarissa? Because it's your birthday in 2 days' time, and your father's going to be here for it." Nancy glanced at her daughter and gave her a bright, encouraging smile. "I'm sure your father's tired, love, but he'll be a lot brighter in the morning, and then you both can have some fun together. I'm most sure." "Yes, Daddy, you could take me swimming in the creek tomorrow."
"Sounds like a jolly good idea," said her father, managing to give his daughter a watery, rather insincere smile.
"Are you hungry?" Nancy asked her husband. "I've made ham and salad for supper."
"Looks delicious," said Tristan. "I'm just going to wash my hand upstairs, if I may, and I'll join you in a jiffy. Where is Bosman?"
"I think he's gone into the barn, chasing some rats. He brought in 2 dead rats into the house last night. Can you believe that? I think we've had an infestation in this heat wave. There was blood and guts all over the kitchen floor, and 2 decapitated rats that he left lying there for me to feast my eyes on. It was a dreadfully macabre sight. I had to clear it all up with my eyes closed. It looked like a scene from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I haven't seen anything like it before. So much blood. Honestly, that cat is the absolute end."
"Let him be," chuckled Tristan. "He's just being a cat. That's what cats do. Besides, he's a great ratter. You should commend him for that. And don't judge him so harshly. The more rats he kills, the better for us as far as I'm concerned. Those nasty buggers need to be exterminated, the whole bloody lot of them, like some of my clients today. But sadly some of those rats are far too large for Bosman to take on, or otherwise I'd gladly let him do it."
"You don't mean that, I'm most sure," said Nancy with a light laugh. "You've had a rough day, that's all. The heat is getting everybody down, and in weather like this we can say things we don't actually mean."
"Oh, but I do mean what I say, love. You have no idea how much I mean every single word."
"That bad?" asked Nancy. "Sounds like you had a very lousy day, Tristan. But join the club. Nobody's very happy at the moment with this dreadful heat, are they? It's been all over the news that everybody needs to stay out of the heat. 2 people have already died, you know.
I heard about that on the news,
said Tristan, leaving the kitchen to go and wash his hands in the upstairs bathroom. When Tristan returned to the table after washing his hands in the upstairs bathroom, Nancy had dished him up a generous plate of ham and salad, which he tucked into greedily.
"Goodness gracious me," said Nancy, staring down at her husband's arms. "Is that a bite on your hand? You've got scratches all over your arms too, and on your cheek. What on earth happened to you? That bite looks very nasty. It could easily get infected if you don't watch out."
"It was probably Bosman," chided Clarissa. "Was it Bosman that did it to you, Daddy? He's a naughty cat, you know. He's always scratching me, and he sometimes even bites. But he doesn't mean to be horrible. I know he doesn't mean it. He just likes to play a little rough. But he let me stroke him yesterday. He was purring. I think he's starting to really like me, Daddy."
"That is because Bosman is a very nice cat," said Tristan. "He's just misunderstood, that's all. He might like to go butchering up the rats, but underneath the scratches and the biting is a very affectionate boy."
"This is not a bite from Bosman," said Nancy, lifting her husband's hand to inspect it closely. She gave her husband an inquiring look, as she was in no doubt that this was a human bite. So who on earth had bitten her husband, and why?
"Let me go and get the medical kit at once. Those wounds of yours need to be attended to,"
said Nancy, rising to her feet, her forehead puckered by puzzle lines. She was privately wondering who on earth could have bitten her husband and given him such a nasty bite. Out loud she simply said,
"You need to have those wounds treated to at once. I'm not happy about the look of that bite mark. It looks red, inflamed and puffy, and it certainly did not come from Bosman."
As Nancy began to use her surgical spirit on her husband's hand, she dabbed away with a piece of cotton wool. She observed the scratches all over his arms and one across his cheeks. What on earth had he been up to? If she didn't know any better, she would say he was having a secret affair with a hedge of thorny briars. But what about the bite mark? Where had that come from? It was definitely human in its origin. He was a travelling salesman, for goodness sake, driving a car around from state to state, and that did not involve walking through hazardous terrain, where you could easily be scratched up by burgeoning branches and bushes embedded with thorny briars.
"This is a human bite, Tristan," she said to him. "What happened? Who bit you?" "I'm afraid it is human," Tristan admitted.
He seemed to realize that lying to his wife would not get him anywhere. His wife had been a nurse at one point in her life, so there was no point in pulling the wool over her eyes. She knew a human bite when she saw one, and would not be easily fobbed off. Tristan tried to think quickly on his feet, for a suitable excuse to satisfy his wife's insatiable curiosity. He drew in a deep breath, for lying was not something that came very easily to him when talking to his wife. Nancy could smell out a lie like a cadaver dog could pick up the scent of a deceased corpse. He knew he needed to tread very carefully here to make up a believable story, and in his quintessential experience, the best way to do this was to knit some truth into the lie, so that hopefully he could hide all the fallen stitches.
"I didn't want to tell you about it, love, but let's just say I've had better days than today. This is a day I shan't be forgetting in a hurry."
"Are you kidding me, Tristan?" said Nancy, looking aghast. "Someone actually bit you?" Nancy's mouth dropped open as she tried to digest the startling revelation.
"I'm afraid so, love. It's rather a long story."
"Well, I'd like to hear it, Tristan. I really would."
"Well, I went to an old lady's house. Her name is Mrs. Winston. She's been my client for many years, but she's a bit wacko, not completely right in the head. Let's just say I've been supplying her cleaning products for many years now, but she wanted a demonstration of our new Hoover.
To cut a long story short, she got me to hoover 3 rooms in her house absolutely thoroughly, to see if she could see a discernible improvement in how they looked after I hoovered them with the new hoover, so she could compare the suction quality to the hoover she currently owns. Well, that's what she said anyway. I knew she wanted me to clean her bloody carpets for her, but what could I do? The woman's got money, and I knew I could get a potential sale out of her if I humoured her, so that's what I did. She had a granddaughter staying with her, a little girl about Clarissa's age. So I got to work, making sure I did a great job in hoovering all the carpets, because I wanted to get that sale. By mistake, I hit the back of a doll lying on the floor, that I gather belonged to her granddaughter. The girl screamed furiously. She said I'd hurt her doll. Then she ran towards me, grabbed my hand, bit it just like that, and lashed out at me with her nails. So she scratched me up quite a bit. That girl did that to you? She bit you on the hand and scratched you? Goodness gracious me, I think I've heard everything now. What on earth did Mrs. Winston say about that? It's an appalling behaviour from her grandchild. Well, of course, she apologised profusely. She said her grandchild had some learning issues, that sometimes she bites and scratches people, that she's a little bit wild, you could say. I can't believe it. That girl needs to mind her manners. I hope Mrs. Winston told her grandchild off for such absurd and disgusting behaviour. That little girl needs to mind her manners. I don't care what learning impediment she may have. You don't go indiscriminately biting and scratching at people, for goodness sake. The girl's not a wild animal. You accidentally ran the hoover over her doll, and she reacts like that. It's absolutely jaw-dropping. What about the scratch on your face? Well, on your cheek, I mean. Did she do that to you too? I'm afraid so, said Tristan. She became very wild. She was so upset about that doll of hers. Ah, she should be ashamed of herself, and that grandmother should be too, said Nancy, shaking her head furiously. Fancy allowing your grandchild to behave like a demented zombie. Well, it wasn't too bad, was it? I mean, after I hoovered Mrs. Winston's carpets, she did decide to purchase the hoover. I think the granddaughter biting me made her feel rather guilty, so it sealed the deal, you could say. I think she felt quite bad about the bite. Well, I hope so too. And I hope she reprimanded the brat. Look at Clarissa here. She's exactly the same age as that girl was. You wouldn't bite a stranger, would you, Clarissa? You'd never behave like that. No, I'd never hurt anybody. But I was at school one day when one of the girls bit a boy because he dropped paint all over her picture in the classroom, and she was so cross with him. She got into trouble with the teacher because she bit the boy, and it actually bled. Well, I should think she got into plenty of trouble. If you had done that, Clarissa, I'd have so much to say to you. I really would, and it wouldn't be good. Honestly, what is the world coming to? It's one thing for Bosman to bite, quite another for an 8-year-old child. I blame the parents for not raising the children right. If you let your kids get away with stuff like this is what ultimately happens. The house was bathed in a congenial silence after the family finally retired to bed. The only sound little Clarissa could hear was the tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. Normally she never noticed this sound because she was so used to it by now, but somehow it was very conspicuous tonight. As the ticking sound drummed on in her head, it was almost as annoying as a dripping tap. The ticking grandfather clock's noises seemed to fade in the background when Clarissa heard a fly buzzing past her. It brushed across her cheeks. The annoying insect seemed to be singling out Clarissa for torment, and she wanted to get her hands on that critter and squash it. The fly continued to pester her, and she lashed out with her hands to try and swat it away, but the fly eluded her. Weren't flies supposed to sleep at night, she thought? If that were the case, this fly didn't seem to know the difference. She reached over to her bedside lamp and switched on the light, so that her bedroom was bathed in a soft glow. She could now see the fly buzzing around her room, and began to chase after it. Ah, there it was! Clarissa was going to grab it, and when she did, she would crush it so hard it would regret the night that it actually bothered her. She could see it buzzing around the room. It was impossible to chase, as it became a losing battle for her. Finally, Clarissa stood up on her bed. It was situated under the window. The mattress creaked under her light weight as she forcefully yanked back the curtains so that the draughts of warm air from the half-open window might actively encourage the fly to leave. Once, of course, it had sensed there was an opportunity for it to escape. She let out a huge relieved sigh when the fly finally flew out of the window, and her plan had worked, for it was gone. Maybe she could finally get some much-needed sleep. It was a flash of very quick movement in the backyard that suddenly grabbed Clarissa's undivided attention. What was that, she wondered? She had recognized the distinctive dark silhouette at once that disappeared into the woods to be that of her father. It would seem her father must have also been struggling to get some sleep. Clarissa could guess where he was going. He was looking for the quintessential opportunity to cool down. He was going to the creek for a swim, wasn't he? He often took midnight dips at the creek to cool off. The idea of swimming with her father under the canopy of the silvery stars was wonderful. They could easily splash around together and possibly even play Marco Polo together if her father was up to it. Clarissa didn't hesitate to dash to her closet. She put on her swimming costume beneath a sundress. She then slipped on her sneakers and very discreetly slid down the banisters, taking care not to wake her mother up. She knew instinctively if her mother Nancy knew what she was up to tonight, she wouldn't be best pleased with her. She had often told Clarissa that her father could be very grumpy, like Bosman the cat. But Clarissa knew that Bosman was becoming much more affectionate these days towards her, and the more time she spent with the cat, the nicer he became. He had scratched her up something bad, had bitten her and even drawn blood on occasion, but she had realized that devoting more attention to Bosman, he was slowly coming around to her, warming to her a little, and possibly the same technique could be applied to her father. Clarissa grabbed a beach towel from the downstairs laundry cupboard and rolled it up into a tight bundle, which she placed under her arm. She grabbed a little flashlight that she found in one of the kitchen cupboards. She glanced briefly at the kitchen clock to read the time. It was 2:10 in the morning. She couldn't believe it was this late. She didn't think she'd ever been up at this time before. Sleep appeared to have eluded her, like it had obviously done her father. Even Mrs. Clarence, their neighbour that they'd bumped into at the ice cream parlour earlier on that day, had been talking about how impossible it was to get to sleep at night, as everywhere in Wyoming people were tossing and turning in their beds, especially if you lived further away from the mountains. The further you lived away from the mountains, the worse it became. Clarissa reasoned if you couldn't sleep at night, you might as well get up and do something. She knew her father wouldn't be too pleased if she followed him into the woods, but she didn't care about that. Surely her father would completely understand her inabilities to sleep tonight in this hot, insufferable weather. Maybe he'd actually be glad for her company. As after all, it was terribly boring to swim on your own, was it not? Besides anything else, her father had faithfully promised to take Clarissa swimming in the morning to the creek. And it was already morning, was it not? Give or take a few hours here and there, and of course the absence of any light. Clarissa was an excellent swimmer, even at 8 years old, but she thought it would be fun to swim at night, which was something she'd never done before. But there was a first time for everything, and there was no time like the present. The night seemed ethereally magical, although the cicadas were making quite a commotion, and the trilling, humming insect vibration seemed to overtake every other sound in the woods. It was warm outside for the mountains, when the temperature should drop significantly at night, so this weather was unusual, but it was infinitely cooler out of doors than it had been in the house, and so Clarissa did gain some light relief. The sky was a black artist's canvas, but it wasn't scary, as a full moon smiled down on her like a friendly face, and the stars in the sky were as bright and as pretty as the diamante jewels in one of her mother's favourite black purses that she loved so much, that she only ever used on special occasions. Clarissa could run like a whippet if she wanted to, so she scrambled hurriedly down the rugged windy paths on her skinny knees, which she knew like the back of her hand, although her parents had never allowed her to play beyond the creek, so she'd never been further into the grove. She had been warned on several occasions by her father that it was not safe to go deep into the woods. He claimed he had seen a mountain lion loitering around in there once, and that story had scared Clarissa half to death. Of course she liked to look at pictures of mountain lions, and admitted they were incredibly handsome wild animals. But she knew, unlike Bosman, these cats were not to be tamed or trusted. She didn't fancy the idea of an encounter with one of these things.
"But are you sure you saw a mountain lion, Tristan, in the woods?" her mother had asked her father sceptically. "I wouldn't have thought they'd wander so close to our property. I would have thought they'd stay closer to the mountains." "I'm very sure I saw a mountain lion," her father had responded insistently. "Which is precisely why I'm saying that Clarissa here under no circumstances can go and explore the grove beyond the creek. She would be easy pickings for a mountain lion. As I keep saying, it's not remotely safe."
Clarissa's father's ominous words had sealed the deal, rather like an invisible contract you never signed, but have a clear understanding of. Without question, there had been many times when temptation had wooed her curiosity and encouraged her to explore deeper in the wood grove, when a little voice had whispered, "Go on, Clarissa, why don't you venture deeper into the grove? Your dad will never know. It'll be our secret. What harm can it possibly do?" Clarissa had ignored the persuasive voice that had urged her to do many courageous things, from climbing trees that intimidated her, to peeking at the Christmas presents her parents had brought her every year, that they hid high up in the closet. Unbeknown to them, Clarissa would take a quick peek, because waiting for Christmas was almost impossible. It would seem her father's words had slackened her resolve, as visions of a mountain lion stalking her through the woods had put an abrupt end to any fanciful thinking on her part. But on this night, everything was different, as even the air in the wood grove was filled with the essence of opportunity that had taken hostage all doubts, fears, and uncertainties, as any thoughts of mountain lions and predatory creatures like that, lurking clandestinely in the darkness, eager to stalk her, didn't even tease her imagination, as all Clarissa could think about was being lovingly embraced by the cool, refreshing water of the creek and enjoying a swim with her father. The smell of pine terpenes, mingled with fresh earthen smells, were very pronounced that night, so much so that they were much more discernible than during the day, along with the sweet heady scent of wild jasmine that lingered in the air. The moonlight magnanimously cast her silvery spell across the woods, allowing soft trickles of light to pass through the trees, and lighting everything up in a pearly luminescence that washed over the landscape and confiscated some of the darkness, so that the rugged paths that snaked through the trees were so much less obscure. In Clarissa's mind, everything was welcoming, as if the trees themselves in the grove were delighted to see her. So Clarissa, unlike so many other 8-year-olds her age, did not find the walk through the trees to be intimidating. She'd caught up with her father very discreetly, making sure her father did not see her. He was moving with a purposeful stride down a path with a flashlight in his hand that was so incredibly bright that it fully lit the path ahead. Clarissa switched her torchlight off, discreetly following him down the rugged trail through the trees. A little voice in her head was warning her to go back home. "You're not supposed to leave the house at night. You might get into trouble. You know what your dad's like. I don't think he's going to be pleased to see you. He might be cross. He really might be cross with you." Clarissa was secretly very intimidated by her father, but she never liked to admit this to herself. Like Bosman the cat, she considered him to be a work in progress, and she was sure in the end she'd win her father around. What harm could it do anyway, if she joined him for a swim at the creek? She'd make her presence known. Once her father dived into the water, she'd jump in behind him and give him the surprise of his life. She imagined her father would be cross with her at first, but the cool water would soothe away his anger, as once you were in the water, you'd be happier. Everyone was happy once they were in the water. She was sure he'd come round, like Bosman the cat. When Clarissa played with Bosman, he always looked at her scathingly, as he did not altogether trust her. and he was cynical that hanging around a little girl could be any fun at all. But the cat toys that Clarissa had recently bought for Bosman in town had worked a treat on the cantankerous cat, and Bosman had become very playful of late, and she had discovered a much more affectionate side to his nature that she had never encountered before. Nothing was impossible. Even the Bible said as much. Only the other day Bosman had seen Clarissa and bounded up to her and purred. He'd rubbed his sleek body against her, and he had allowed Clarissa to stroke him, which was a first. As Clarissa followed her father through the woods, she noticed he was taking the straight path ahead through the trees. She knew that path led away from the creek to forbidden territory. Clarissa was surprised by this. Why was her father not going directly to the creek? Where was he going? She had never been allowed to venture deeper into the woods, so if she did follow her father now, she'd need to be incredibly quiet. Ostensibly, if he was to find her following her into the restricted part of the woodgrove where she was not allowed to venture, she'd get into heaps of trouble. Of that she was in no doubt. She needed to be very careful. You could only push her father so far before he lost it with you. She had discovered that from experience. Clarissa's father, of course, had never been physically abusive to her or her mother. Indifferent, most certainly, snappy and short-tempered, of course. But her father never really got mad, unless he was pushed so far. Then he'd develop this cold, hard look in his eyes, if you pressed his buttons the wrong way. And that look had always scared Clarissa half to death. Clarissa could hear the sound of her father's boots pounding the leaf litter as he ambled steadily down the trail. He was limping on one of his legs, and occasionally appeared to wince in pain. She wisely kept her distance behind him, running discreetly from tree to tree, and it was beginning to become like a game for her that she was actually enjoying, rather like playing hide-and-seek with her father. Only he didn't know he was playing it with her, which made it all the more fun. Soon an old-looking shack came into view. It was nestled in the middle of the woods. It looked rather like a tool shed, or a place where you stored coal or firewood. Then she realized it must be her father's workshop. Of course, that is what it was. Clarissa's father had spoken about the workshop often enough, as her father liked to work in the woods, and would often go to his workshop for some recreational time to be with himself. He'd tell Clarissa's mother he needed some space. So this was the workshop he talked about. For a moment Clarissa noticed her father seemed rather hesitant. He stopped outside his workshop and was looking behind him very apprehensively. Clarissa held her breath. He didn't know that he was being followed, did he? Could he sense he was being watched? What if he were to find her, skulking behind one of the trees? She knew she would be in awful trouble if he was to discover her. Please God, may he not discover her. She sighed with relief when her father seemed satisfied that no one was around. He bent down on the ground and began to brush the leaves and pine needles away from the forest floor. What was he doing, she wondered. She held her breath, peering behind the tree, to observe her father's rather bizarre movements. There was a secret wooden door in the ground, and her father was pulling back the outside bolt, and then he trotted down these concrete steps deep into the ground. It was like one of those air raid shelters her mother had told her about, that people would go and hide in during the war. Where was he going? What was her father doing? She didn't even know about this place. Did her mother even know about it? She seriously doubted it. Her father was acting very furtive. As Clarissa thought about all this in earnest, she couldn't help but feel a burgeoning excitement swelling up inside her, like a sponge being filled with water to full capacity. Of course she knew what her father was doing. He was fixing up a bicycle for her birthday, wasn't he? He had promised her he'd get her a brand new one, as she had outgrown her old one. She loved her old bike, of course she did. Her father had made that one up for her as well. But it really was on its last legs now. It squeaked all the time, and it was rusty in places. So a new one would be very nice, wouldn't it? Her father had come to his workshop to prepare a birthday present for her, as Clarissa's birthday was in 2 days' time. She'd been counting the seconds for her birthday to arrive. She could hardly wait. There was going to be a birthday party where all her friends would be invited, and she knew she'd get tons of presents and plenty of delicious birthday cake, and hopefully lots of ice cream. Clarissa had gone with her mother to choose her birthday cake from the baker in town, and she'd taken a picture of Bosman to the baker and asked her to make a cake of her cat for her birthday party. She had overheard her father talking to her mother about how he needed to make it perfect for Clarissa's birthday.
"I've got a very nice surprise for her that she's going to love, but I'm afraid it needs lots of work,"
she had overheard him say. Now everything made perfect sense to Clarissa. She was putting the pieces of the peculiar puzzle together. Her father had not been able to sleep, and had promptly decided to come and work on her bicycle, to get it ready in time for her birthday, as of course it was in 2 days' time, so he didn't have much time left to make it absolutely perfect for her. A big smile erupted on Clarissa's face as she tried to imagine the bicycle her father was preparing for her. He'd always been so very good with his hands, so she knew that it would be a very special bike, and she hoped that there'd be lots of pink on her bike, tassels on the handbars, a nice bell perhaps, maybe a bit of sparkling bling, and a pink basket placed in the front of the handlebars so her dolls could come on her bicycle rides with her. And of course she could take picnics in her basket and eat sandwiches by the creek. Clarissa tried to imagine the bicycle her father was preparing for her. She realized he could be a long time in his underground workshop working on her bike, but she decided she'd wait patiently. Finally her father came out of the opening of the ground, sooner than she would imagine he would. He was muttering under his breath. He didn't look at all pleased. Clarissa was certain she'd heard him say, "Bloody bitch." She watched her father doing up his flies of his chinos, as if he'd only just been to the toilet or something. Maybe there was a bathroom in the underground workshop. She watched her father bolt the door and then cover it with leaves, as if he wanted to hide the door from scrutinizing eyes. He was grunting under his breath as he limped through the trees, making his way back to the house. Clarissa would be wise to do the same, and to clandestinely slip back to the house. The more she thought about the bicycle her father was preparing for her birthday, the more urgent the desire for her to see the bike. "I just want a little peek," she told herself, "just a wee little peek." Once Clarissa was certain her father was long gone, she ran over to the ground and began to move away the pine needles and leaves that covered the hidden door. Suddenly she heard a rattling noise, as if her father was coming back. Her heart began to boom violently in her chest, so much so that the noise in her ears was deafening. If her father found her trying to get access through the secret door into his underground workshop or bunker, or whatever you choose to call it, he'd be as mad as hell. Of that she knew with certainty. And the last thing that Clarissa wanted was to provoke her father to rage. In her deep down instincts, she knew that she was afraid of awakening the dragon within him. Clarissa waited for a few brief seconds, sighing with relief. She must have been mistaken, she thought. The woods had become ominously quiet. Even the humming sounds of the insects had all but retreated. If she'd known any better, she might have realized that this unnatural silence might not have actually been a good sign. Had she been older, she'd have described the woodgrove as becoming somewhat airy. Clarissa made light work of the bolt, pulling it back rather easily. It was well oiled. They had the same bolt on the yard shed at home, so it was easy enough to figure out how it worked. Once she pulled back the bolt, she stared down at the steep concrete steps that led down to the ground below. It looked just like a cellar, she thought, or an air raid shelter of some kind. It was dark and oppressive in this underground workshop, but so strong was her desire to see her new bicycle that Clarissa didn't hesitate to venture down those steep steps. The enthusiasm within her could not be suppressed, even by a faint peppering of doubt. It was when she arrived to the bottom of the steps that she heard a strange whimpering sound. It was in that moment that Clarissa's excitement seemed to escalate. She realized her father had not been coming here to fix up a bicycle for her birthday after all. Her father had bought her a puppy. That had to be it. It made perfect sense that he'd keep a puppy here and come and feed it during the night. He wanted to keep the puppy as a surprise for Clarissa. How often had she begged and begged her dad for a puppy? He had always said, "We will see." And finally all her begging had paid off in leaps and bounds. He had actually gone and got her a puppy after all. A puppy was a zillion trillion times better than a bicycle. she thought, her heart leaping in excited expectation. The poor thing must be so frightened being kept alone underground like this. Did her father not know that keeping a puppy down here, in this dark, inconspicuous place, was an unkind thing for him to do? With the soft light of her torch, Clarissa scanned the underground room, that smelt very unpleasant, of damp, dust and ammonia. The light of her torch illuminated dusty shelves covered with rusty old paint cans that looked so old, probably from generations ago. But where was the puppy, she wondered? She could see a wooden work desk covered with carpenter's tools, and a collection of hunting knives that looked terribly sharp. Why did her father keep such horrible weapons, she wondered? She could see a sander and some pieces of wood, in all shapes and sizes, stacked against the wall, haphazardly, all covered with cobwebs and dust. There was an old door off its hinges, and a couple of old French windows stacked against the wall, that seemed to have long since been forgotten about. The whimpering sound continued, and Clarissa felt very concerned for the poor puppy. Where was it? How long had her dad kept this puppy down here for? She didn't think her father really understood animals, because you shouldn't treat them like this. Apart from Bosman, of course. He seemed to understand Bosman. So was it any surprise to her that he'd keep a puppy in this uncongenial dark place? No, not really. Clarissa began navigating the flashlight across the far corner of the wall, to the next wall and the next. She began calling out the puppy's name. "Where are you, boy?" she called out. "Where are you?" She was longing to find the puppy, wrap her arms around the poor little thing to reassure it. She hoped with all her heart it was a golden retriever. Please God, may it be a golden retriever puppy. They were the cutest, most adorable puppies in the entire world. She had always wanted a golden retriever, with a cute face, dark eyes, and layers upon layers of soft golden bouncy blonde fur. But when she flashed her torchlight in the corner of the room, she nearly jumped out of her skin, when she saw a pair of eyes staring up at her. But these eyes did not belong to a puppy. At first Clarissa didn't know what she was seeing, so she fixed the light steadily on those eyes, and was horrified to discover they belonged to a woman, who was seated on a dirty, very narrow mattress, covered in ugly brown stains. A long chain was attached to the woman's ankle. She was anchored to the floor, which meant she was pretty much trapped in this uncongenial space, like a dog on a chain. And the ammonia that Clarissa was smelling was probably from the woman's own ablutions. She could see a bucket close to where the woman was sitting that smelt very bad. The woman's face was covered in so much dust that it made her hollow, almost lifeless eyes stare at Clarissa like a corpse. "Who are you?" asked the woman, her eyes staring up at Clarissa through the torchlight, as if she thought she was seeing things, and was certain her eyes must be tricking her. "My name is Clarissa. I'm 8 years old. What's your name?" "Are you real? You're not a ghost, are you?" asked the woman. "Please tell me you're not a ghost. I couldn't bear it if you were a ghost, because a ghost wouldn't be able to help me." "No, silly, I'm not a ghost," laughed Clarissa. "What's your name?" "You mean you're real? I can't help wondering if I'm hallucinating half the time. I'm so hungry and so tired. Sometimes I can't distinguish between what is real and what is not." "I'm real, of course I'm real. What's your name? Why have you been crying? I heard you whimpering. I thought you were a puppy. Your eyes are puffy and red. Your face is so covered with dirt. You look like you've been lying in a coal mine. You're so thin. Why are you thin? My daddy didn't hurt you, did he? I followed him here. I thought he was keeping a birthday surprise from me. I wanted to see what it was. Why is he keeping you here? I don't understand." "My name's Catherine Beavis. You have to help me, Clarissa. You have to help me. You look like a clever girl. I'm going to need your help. Do you think you can help me, Clarissa?" "It depends on what you want me to do," said Clarissa, considering the question with much thought. "I'm in trouble, Clarissa. Big, big trouble. I need your help. Your father brought me here. Look what he did to me." She pointed to the brown stains on the mattress that Clarissa soon realized were blood. Her eyes grew round with horror. She did not realize her father had beaten up this poor woman. Clarissa looked confounded. "My daddy hurt you?" she asked, her face growing as white as a lily. "My daddy says you should never hit a girl, but he hit you." The woman nodded. "Well, if he told you that, he was lying. Your dad hurt me really badly. He beat me hard, punched me in the chest. He raped me. Do you know what it means to rape someone, Clarissa? Do you know what that means?" Clarissa nodded. "My mother told me all about rape. She said bad men can hurt women like that. Did my dad rape you? But why would he do that? I don't understand. I tried to bite him, lash out at him. But I'm so much smaller than he is. Your father is a strong man, Clarissa. I should never have accepted a lift from him. None of this would have happened. I really thought I could trust him. It just goes to show what a poor judge of character I really am. Your father told me he's been fantasizing about doing this to a woman for a long time. He said he prepared this place for his warped sadomasochist fantasies. Your dad is a monster, Clarissa. I know you don't want to hear this, but no normal person would do this to a woman, would they? He beat me up, Clarissa, punched me in the ribs. He really hurt me. He chained my ankle. Look at this. I can barely move, except to get to the water bottles over there and to the bucket over there for my ablutions, that he leaves for days, so it stinks to hell of ammonia in here. And I have to breathe it all in. It's been insufferable, but I've had to get used to it. It does stink very bad of ammonia. You're right. I can't believe he leaves the bucket there for you like that. He treats you like an animal. He does, Clarissa. And I have to breathe it all in. But I've got used to it. You can get used to anything, you know, if you're exposed to it for long enough. Your father only gives me food if I behave myself. So I'm half-starved, Clarissa. I haven't eaten for a long time. Sometimes I feel so faint and so dizzy with hunger. That's why I thought I imagined you. That's why I thought you weren't real. But I am real. You can touch me if you like. I can see that you've been starved, 'cause you are very thin. Your bones are sticking out really badly. Your face is sunken in. How long have you been down here? Asked Clarissa, flashing her torchlight around the dim space and trying her level best to take it all in. She rubbed her eyes, wanting to wipe this all away, to believe that this was a bad dream that she would surely awaken from, but she knew it wasn't. There'd always been something rather unfathomable about her father, something she knew in her gut she did not like, and now she'd found out his dark secret. I'm not sure, said the woman. When you're down here in this dungeon, you don't know what time of the day it is, whether it's day or night, or how many days have actually passed. I haven't seen the light for a long time. Your father picked me up on June the 1st. I do know that. If you happen to know today's date, we can figure out how long I've been down here. You must have been here for about 3 weeks. I'm good at math, you see, so I can tell you that. It's June the 22nd today. I know because it's my birthday in 2 days' time. How did my dad bring you here in the first place? He's always out on the open road. He's a travelling salesman. He sells cleaning products, polishes and hoovers, all kinds of things like that. He travels from state to state. The woman considered Clarissa's words. I think I must be the unluckiest person in the world in that case. But then again, that doesn't really surprise me. I've never won a thing in my entire life, but I've always lost things. I've been unlucky that way. If you must know, I decided to hitch a lift for the first time in my life. My brother always warned me about that. He told me to never hitch a lift from a stranger. And I did. Can you believe that? But you should never accept a lift from a stranger. I mate, and I know that. My mother told me that. It sounds to me, Clarissa, that your mother is a very clever and wise woman. She's right about that. Clarissa thought about this for a brief second. Yes, I think she does happen to be clever. Why did you get into my daddy's car? It was simple. I needed a lift. But I'll tell you this, Clarissa. When I was getting into your father's car, for a brief second, I felt this wave of uncertainty overcome me, and I didn't listen to it. If only I'd listened to my intuition, I would not be embroiled in this sticky mess, would I? I suppose not, Clarissa agreed. Your father is keeping me here, Clarissa, against my will. He's doing horrible, horrible things to my body. But if I don't do what he demands of me, he punches me so hard. He hurts me badly. He told me that when he's done with me, and I've served my purpose, he'll slit my throat with one of those sharp knives over there on that table. He says he'll wait for me to bleed out. Then he'll bury me in the grove. He says no one will ever find me. Clarissa's eyes grew round. My daddy told you he's going to kill you. The woman nodded. Your dad is a very, very bad man, Clarissa. I've been wanting to die. I can't bear being abused like this any longer. I can't take it any more. You need to help me before he comes back. I have to get out of here. Can you bring me that axe over there on the table? The one next to those knives. It's beyond my reach. If you bring it here, I might be able to break the chain over. You want this, do you? Asked Clarissa, handing the woman the axe that she found on the table. The woman gratefully took the axe from her and began to carefully hack away at the chain with huge, loud blasts. Clarissa closed her eyes tightly. She couldn't bear to watch, in case the woman accidentally hacked her foot off. But to her surprise, the chain broke easily, and the woman's foot was rescued and freed from its incarceration. Clarissa observed that the young woman was completely naked, something that she had managed to overlook, as the woman's body was completely covered with dirt. Bruises were all over her body, and scratches. Her face was filthy dirty, and the damp space smelt disgusting of urine. Clarissa may have only been 8 years old, but she knew in that quintessential moment that what her father had done was incredibly wrong. Very wrong. Her father must be a very bad man. But what if he were to come back right now? She could get into heaps of trouble. Maybe he'd lock her up as well so that her mother would never find her, and she'd never see Bosman again. And for reasons unbeknown to her, the idea of not seeing Bosman again made her feel desperately sad, and a tear trickled down her cheeks. Don't be upset, little girl, said Catherine, looking up at Clarissa with concern in her face. It must be upsetting learning this about your father, I know. I'm just scared about my daddy coming back, said Clarissa. He'll lock me up. I know he will. He'll be so cross with me for helping you. That's not going to happen, said Catherine reassuringly. Everything's going to be just fine, I promise you. Your dad will never be able to lay a finger on you again. The woman tried to stand up, but she almost fell backwards, as if the blood had rushed very quickly to her head. She suddenly became faint. The young woman didn't look at all good. She looked like a starved dog that hadn't eaten for many weeks. Her stomach was concave, and the ribs jutted out through her skin so obtrusively, rather like the roots of a tree. We need to go, said Clarissa, but my father can't know I helped you escape, because then I'll get into lots and lots of trouble. You're not the one in trouble, love. You rescued me, remember that. Your dad is the one who's in trouble. But I need to get out of here. We need to get help. Where exactly is this place? I was brought here in the back of your father's trunk, in his large SUV. He travelled over quite some distance. He dragged me through a wooded area, and at gunpoint forced me into this underground shelter in the middle of the woods. I do know that much. You're in Wyoming, said Clarissa. How did you find me, little girl? I don't exactly understand how you managed to find me. I thought my daddy was going for a swim in the creek. It's why I'm wearing my swimming costume under my dress. Look, she said, lifting up her dress to show the woman her red swimming costume. I wanted to join him in the water. I was going to surprise him. I didn't think he'd be terribly pleased with me, but I thought he'd come round in the end. I followed him here, but I've never seen this place before, as my dad's never allowed me to go into the woods beyond the creek. I knew my dad had a workshop in the woods, but I didn't know about the secret room under the ground until I watched him opening the door. I thought he was keeping my birthday present down here, you see, and I wanted to take a quick peek at it, because I thought he was giving me a special bike, and that he was doing it up for me. I always know what I'm getting for Christmas and birthdays, because I find my presents. I like to peek at what I'm being given.
The woman nodded. Yes, I had a feeling I was in Wyoming. It was just a feeling I had, but I was sure I was right about it. Clarissa observed the woman's hair was a messy tangle around her face, and she was sure it must be very knotty, and she could only imagine how much it would hurt to brush that mess out. The woman could barely stand on her 2 legs. She was wobbling on her knees rather precariously, and reminded Clarissa of a newborn lamb trying to rise up on its unsteady legs moments after it was born. The woman was breathing heavily, as if it was a monumental effort to perform the most basic of human movements. I feel so weak," she complained, "but I've got to go with you. I can't possibly stay here a moment longer." She grabbed a bottle of water and began to drink it down furiously fast, as if the water might give her some much-needed strength. Was she ever going to make it up the steep concrete steps, Clarissa wondered, when she could barely stand upright? "Maybe you better not come with me," she said. "You're very weak. I could go home and tell my mother in secret where you are. She'd get you help. I know she will. She won't tell my daddy we know about his secret. You'll be safe, I promise you. I won't be gone for very long." "No, Clarissa, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't leave me here. Please, I'm begging you. I know I'm weak, but I have to get out of here. If your father comes back, he'll kill me. I know he will. There isn't much time left. I'm dying, Clarissa. Can't you see that? I'm weak. Please will you pass me my clothes, Clarissa? They're over there on the bench. I've been naked since your father brought me here. Luckily the weather's been hot, because I've been fine. If it had been cold, I'd have probably frozen to death." Clarissa found the woman's clothes. To her horror they were covered with blood, but it was better the woman put them on than remain naked. "Clarissa, I want you to think long and hard. You say you don't know this part of the woods because you don't come here, because you're not allowed to. Do you know anywhere you can take me to that is not far from here, where I could call for help? A nearby farmhouse, perhaps, or a road where I could flag down a passing driver or something?" "It won't be safe, Clarissa, to go to your house. You must realize that. Your father is a very bad man, Clarissa. He's dangerous. If your mother learns about me, he could even harm her, because he'd want to stop her from telling anyone about his dark secret. There's no lengths he wouldn't go to protect it, I'm most sure. You need to come with me, Clarissa. If he finds out you've helped me, he might harm you as well. He may be your father biologically, but he's a monster. You do realize that, don't you? People are locked up for crimes like this. He'd be locked away in prison for the rest of his life if the law found out what he'd done to me." Clarissa nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek again. "I thought my dad was like Bosman, a little cranky, but I thought he could so easily change. I think I always knew there was something strange about my father. My mum knows it too, but she just tells me not to press his buttons because he can be quite horrible when he gets mad." "Who's Bosman?" asked the woman, looking perturbed. "Bosman's my cat at home. He scratches and bites people. He gets cross, but underneath it all, he's really a nice cat. He's been coming around recently. I've been able to stroke him. I thought my dad was the same." "He's not, Clarissa. I'm so sorry to tell you this. I know it's hard to hear. Cats can come round.
They can become tame and domesticated. But some men never can. Your father is not right in the head." Clarissa nodded. "I know," she agreed. It was with a monumental, superhuman effort that Catherine inched forward very gingerly, taking tiny steps, heaving and grunting as she did. It was very difficult to pull herself up one step followed by the other, as they were uneven and were very, very steep. She told Clarissa that her body was hurting, not only from food deprivation, but also from all the brutal punches that she had sustained from Clarissa's father. She was surprised that she hadn't punctured a lung or broken any bones, given the brutality of those attacks. Slowly but surely Catherine managed, with the help of Clarissa, to finally get up to the top step, until they were both successfully out of the underground trap, in which she had been incarcerated for the last 3 weeks or so, against her will. Catherine breathed in the fresh honeyed air, as if it was quite literally the most beautiful thing she had ever inhaled. "Oh, I can't believe it! I actually made it up the steps, and I'm here. I'm almost free. Well, almost. Where are you going to take me, Clarissa?" she asked, leaning on the 8-year-old for support. "I think we'll go up that path over there," said Clarissa decisively. She had never felt more grown up in all her life as she did now. "That will take us to the Clarence farmhouse. Mrs. Clarence is very nice. She'll help us. I'm sure she'll call the police for you." "How far is the Clarence farmhouse?" asked Catherine, looking as if the idea of walking any further was an impossibility that she simply could not entertain. After several lumbering, chaotic efforts, it was more than clear that Catherine's weakened state, despite her very best efforts, was not helping her at all, because she wasn't going to get very far on such unsteady, wobbly legs. It was like all the last remaining dregs of energy that was left within her had been violently ripped out of her system. She had become like a car in the knacker's yard, an old one at that was devoid of any gas, and simply refused to budge an inch. "You need to wait for me here," said Clarissa, realizing that Catherine could not move any further. "I'll go to Mrs. Clarence's farmhouse. I'll get help for you. You need to hide behind the tree, behind my father's workshop over there. Wait for me there." "Promise me that you'll be back soon," asked Catherine nervously, looking around and about herself. "What if your dad comes back, Clarissa?" "It's unlikely he will. He's probably gone to bed by now. He could be fast asleep. I won't be long, I promise you." "Please hurry," Catherine said, staring after the 8-year-old girl, who bounded through the trees like a gazelle to get her help. She had never met anyone like little Clarissa before. What a brave and clever girl she was, for one so young. How disappointed it must have been for her to discover that her father had not been keeping a puppy nor a bicycle for her. Instead, Clarissa had stumbled over her father's insidious dark secret. The pretty little girl, with her blonde ringlets and round blue eyes, looked so innocent, so whimsically naive. But she was older than her years, in terms of her emotional maturity. She was as sharp as a button, and she knew instinctively that what her father had done was very wrong. Yet despite her obvious loyalty to her father, she had known the right thing to do was to call for help on Catherine's behalf. And Catherine knew the little girl would do as she had promised. Catherine realized she was very lucky that Clarissa had found her, for she knew she wasn't out of the woods yet, though, until she was around people she could really trust. Catherine tried desperately to imagine what that little girl must feel to uncover such a horrifying truth about her father. She wondered if there had been any warning signs in the child's young life that had made the little girl suspicious of her father, that there was something perhaps that wasn't quite right about him. She had almost suggested as much. She wondered if Clarissa's mother had an inkling that there was something off about her husband. She was sure there had to be many signs. Yet, if the truth be told, Catherine could remember that her first impression of the stranger that would soon become her abductor had been very benign. After all, you would never just willy-nilly climb into a stranger's car, if he looked like some kind of weirdo. But then again, All these serial killers you heard about, like John Wayne Gacy, Peter Sutcliffe, and more besides, had nothing about their appearance that stood out, that would warn you to keep away. On the contrary, the man who had abducted her had been extremely attractive, and he'd given her a big lopsided smile and said to her,
"You want a lift, do you?"
And she'd said, "That's very kind of you. I really need a lift. Just so you know, I don't do this kind of thing, except lifts from strangers, I mean. But I'm stranded, in a position where beggars can't be choosers." She didn't tell the stranger, who was giving her a lift, about the unfortunate quarrel she'd had with her boyfriend. She had been so mad at Kevin. She had told him to let her out of the car at once, and had stormed off. She had told him it was over between them, and that she never wanted to see him again as long as she lived. And he had just simply said,
"That's fine by me. The feeling's mutual."
Kevin had probably thought she'd call an Uber to get a lift back home, but what he didn't realise was her purse, along with her cell phone, were tucked under his seat. She knew the only way to get help was to wave down someone on the road, and it was just her bad luck to wave down a predator. What were the chances of that happening? It was when she'd climbed into the seat next to the stranger that there was an inner nudge inside her telling her to get the hell away from this man and not to accept a lift from him under any circumstances. Catherine had persuaded herself that such a burgeoning inhibition was irrational. She had never hitchhiked a day in her life before, and she knew she'd never do it again. She knew that nobody would be looking for her, as she and her boyfriend had just split, and he probably didn't even bother to clean out his car, so it would be a long while before he discovered her purse under the seat. And even if he did, he'd probably send it straight back to her in the post. The argument that they had had in the car had been very brutal. There would be no coming back from this. Catherine had only recently settled in South Dakota, and her parents were living abroad in the Seychelles, and so she didn't speak to them very much. So in truth nobody would know that she was actually missing. And if that wasn't bad enough, she'd only just been sacked from her waitressing job at the restaurant she'd been working at, because she'd had a nasty fallout with the manager there. So no one would know that she was even missing. When Catherine tried to think about what had happened to her that day, when she had accepted a lift from Clarissa's father, her memory had become foggy and vague, probably because she didn't want to remember very much. She did recall that he'd pulled out a Glock revolver, stopped the car, and insisted that she got into his trunk. She had been so terrified. Everybody warned you never ever to get into the car with someone pointing a revolver at you. But she had not been able to disobey this man. She had been so afraid, far too afraid to do what they advise you to do, when they tell you to run away or scream. She hadn't been in a position to do any of those things. But she knew with certainty that she had sealed her own inevitable fate, and that she would unlikely get out of this alive. Her abductor had driven her for many hours, cooped up in a hot, stuffy trunk, in very inhospitable conditions that had almost killed her, because it had been insufferably hot. The man had surreptitiously brought her here, and kept her a slave for the last few weeks. He had forced himself upon her, and the pain had been absolutely excruciating, like nothing she'd ever experienced before. And she had seen Clarissa's father literally get off on her fear and terror, as if it electrified him and gave him some kind of a head rush. When he told her that she should be proud, as she was his very first, and there would be more to come, she had been quite stunned by this. She had also realized after speaking to Clarissa that she had been confined to this underground prison for over 3 weeks, but it may as well have been an entire lifetime, for it seemed as if time had just stood still. "Please, please let me go," she had cried out. "I won't tell anyone you brought me here. I won't tell them you raped me, that you hurt me. I won't say anything, I promise. Just let me go." Her abductor had cruelly laughed at her, square in the face. Her suggestion had been preposterous to him.
"I've only just started having fun with you, Catherine. I'm enjoying myself very much. You think I want to let you go? Are you crazy?" he had said, shaking his head. "I haven't finished with you yet. And even if I had lost interest in you, do you really think I'd let you go? You may be the first woman that I've ever abducted, but you will not be the last. If I went all soft on you, my days of enjoying myself like this would surely be numbered, and that is not going to happen. Do I look as if I've got the word mug written across my face? I've got way too much to lose to ever let you go. I have a daughter and a wife, and I'm not going to let the likes of you destroy my life. You're my slave, and when I'm done with you, there will be others to follow.
Catherine had realized that this monster who had abducted her was quite literally a psychopath, devoid of any emotions. Every time he raped her, it hurt so dreadfully bad. She'd close her eyes and beg God for it all to be over, and the more she cried out in agonizing pain, the more physically aroused her abductor became. In truth, death was significantly more preferable than being subject to this man's brutality a moment longer. It was on this unassuming evening, when she hadn't even realized what time of the day it was, that the monster had come back again to have his wicked way with her, that she had lost all hope, sensing that she couldn't face another hour with this man again. She had been whimpering from the pain and the aftermath of the rape. It was after he'd left she had suddenly sensed she was not alone, and that was when she heard a girl's voice saying, "Little puppy, where are you? Where are you, little puppy?" In the cloying darkness of the clammy, sticky atmosphere, in this underground bunker, she had observed an 8-year-old girl, whom at first she had persuaded herself had to be a ghost, for she couldn't be real. Yet 8-year-old Clarissa had turned out to be the monster's little child. As Catherine sat on the earthen ground, bespeckled with leaves and twigs, behind a large oak tree, she felt consumed by her puny enfeeblement. She was so emaciated, the energy within her so faint. She felt like a dying bird, with its head flopping to one side. She kept closing her eyes again and again, as the desire to sleep overcame her. She needed to stay awake in case the monster was to come back. Clarissa was getting her help, but she couldn't relax yet until that help came. But she was so tired, oh, so desperately tired. She was struggling to stay awake. Tristan Pearson was not in a good mood after he'd left the underground bunker. He had thought the girl would be more cooperative today, but even in her weakened state, Catherine was still putting on quite the fight. Part of him was impressed by her resolve, but she was annoying him, and the sooner he got rid of her, the better. He'd have to find someone else. Yesterday he'd returned home early. He'd parked his car in the back of an old logging road and made his way to the woods. He'd spent an awful lot of time in the underground bunker, raping Catherine over and over again, until the woman was literally crying out for mercy. She had been in so much pain, and that had been very satisfying to watch. The woman had bitten him hard. She attacked him fiercely, with what was left of her gnarled nails. So he'd made an excuse to his wife Nancy about a client's granddaughter biting him inappropriately because he happened to bump his hoover into her doll. Tristan had to get creative with the excuses in order for Nancy to believe him. But if she hadn't believed him, she would have known something was up with him and might eventually sniff out his secret, and that could never be allowed to happen. Nancy had been appalled by the suggestion that a little girl, Clarissa's age, had bitten him. But if that bitch Catherine bit him again, and Nancy was to notice another bite mark on him, what excuse would he make up next time, and would it even be believable? He seriously doubted it. That girl Catherine is more trouble than she's worth. I'd prefer a much more malleable, obliging woman, he thought. This woman's got far too much fight in her. The sooner I finish her off, the better. I need to slit that throat of hers and bury her in the grove. I don't think I can ever tame a wild one like her. For many long years, Tristan had fantasized about abducting a woman. But mistake number one he had made, that he would never repeat again, was abducting a woman who tried to fight back. The demure, self-effacing type would be so much better for him. But Catherine was no shrinking violet, even in her starved, emaciated state. which was commendable, but that was not the kind of woman he was looking for. If the truth be told, Tristan had never felt his sexual fantasies were ever fulfilled until he'd kept a woman hostage, which was something he'd planned to do for a very long time. But the opportunity had never arrived for him until he caught sight of Catherine hitchhiking for a lift, and this was when the tide had turned for him. He could not imagine ever putting a lid on this lifestyle now. It had been so incredibly exciting to hear Catherine scream out in agonizing pain, and it sent him into a rapturous euphoria that he now knew had become like an insatiable drug that would never end with just one woman. Catherine would be the first of many. He was too clever to get caught, he thought.
Next time I'm going to be a whole lot more discerning as to who I actually pick up,
he thought to himself. It was an uncomfortably unpleasant night. He had told his wife he was going to take a dip at the creek, and so he decided to take a shortcut to the creek before he returned home, to get the nasty smells of ammonia off his body, by taking a plunge in the ice-cold water. It was as he was navigating his way to the creek that he found his daughter's beach towel, lying rolled up in a bundle along the path, as if it had been accidentally dropped there. What the hell, he thought. What was that doing there? He didn't think too much about the matter, but found use for the towel after enjoying a dip in the water and returning back to the house. It was as he was in the house making himself a glass of ice-cold cloudy lemonade, he thought about how odd it was to find Clarissa's towel in the grove. He thought he ought to check up on his little girl to see if she was still in bed, and when he realized that Clarissa was not in her bedroom, nor was she lying in bed, a horrifying thought crossed his mind. Had Clarissa sneaked out into the grove and followed him, assuming he was going for a swim in the creek, but realized he'd taken a different path?
How could I be such a fool? I knew someone was watching me, he thought, when I was about to enter my underground bunker. I felt someone there. I was certain I was being watched. Please, God, don't tell me Clarissa saw the door in the ground. Don't tell me she saw me.
He knew exactly what his daughter was like. She had an insatiable curiosity on her, and was always following him around, like a pathetic, very annoying lapdog. What if his little girl had uncovered his insidious secret? Tristan did not hesitate to make a quick dash to the grove. His daughter Clarissa must be stopped at once, before it was too late. He'd do absolutely anything to protect his perfidious secret from coming out. The night seemed to be cloyingly oppressive, very clammy. He found he was perspiring profusely, and sweat had broken out under his armpits, and water was rolling down his back like raindrops. If that wasn't bad enough, all these nagging, inauspicious thoughts were playing treacherous mind games with his mind. He had a horrifying vision of Clarissa stumbling across Catherine lying naked on a blood-soaked mattress in the underground bunker.
I have been so careful, he thought. Little Clarissa is about to ruin everything for me. I won't let her do that for me. If that happens, she's a dead girl.
It had suited him to get married to Nancy when she'd fallen pregnant all those years ago. But he knew there was no emotional attachment between the two of them. The truth was Tristan didn't love anyone apart from himself. Everybody else was disposable in his life as far as he was concerned. But at the same time, being married to Nancy and having a child like Clarissa made him appear like a regular family man, which was a useful cover for him. Tristan made light work of his efficient, brisk and purposeful walk through the woods. He had the bright light of his torch guiding the way. It was when he ventured into his underground bunker, where his prisoner was held captive, that his worst, most dreadful fears were confirmed. There was no sign of Catherine anywhere. There was no time to lose. Time was of the absolute essence. He knew this. He had to find his daughter Clarissa at once, along with Catherine, whom he'd held captive for over 3 weeks. Catherine was very weak and feeble. She wouldn't have got very far on foot, so he'd easily be able to catch up with her. He'd find his daughter Clarissa and Catherine, and he'd slit their throats and quickly dispose of their bodies. As he climbed out of the bunker, closing the door behind him, which he concealed with leaves and foliage, he noticed some disturbed ground further along the path, that led to behind the shack, and he followed it. And there, sitting behind the old oak tree, was Catherine. She was wearing the clothes she'd been wearing on the day he'd picked her up, but they were covered with so many bloodstains, because he'd beaten her up really hard, so much so that she'd bled out, before he'd forced the clothes off her. She was sitting on the ground, with her sorry head buried beneath her knees. She appeared not to notice him, but then all of a sudden, as if hit by a sudden jolt of lightning, she looked up, and his eyes bored into hers.
Well, well, who do we have here? He asked her.
Go away! Leave me alone! Cried Catherine, trying to rise to her feet, but stumbling over rather awkwardly, as every ounce of strength that she had left in her had been completely leached out of her body. Go away! Leave me alone! She cried out, using her hands to fight off Tristan. But it was no use. Your daughter's gone to call the police. She's been gone for a long while. It's too late for you now. It's over for you. You might as well accept it.
You bloody bitch. Where did my daughter go?
Tristan asked, grabbing Catherine by the hair and yanking her backwards very hard, causing her a great deal of pain. She cried out. He pulled her forcefully across the ground. Catherine let out another pained but very shrill shriek. What happened next was almost paradoxical. The ground shook, as if the woodgrove had been hit by a mighty earthquake, and there were the sounds of ponderous feet, running with lightning speed through the woodgrove. The next thing Catherine knew was that Tristan had released his grip on her hair, and was saying, "Bloody hell! Put me down!" And that was when Catherine looked up to see a huge humanoid-looking creature covered with so much hair. He was easily over 10 foot tall, with ponderous shoulders, overlong arms, and a ripped torso. She realized she was staring at a huge male Bigfoot. The male Bigfoot had picked up Tristan in the air, and Tristan was screaming, "Put me down! Put me down!" The Bigfoot appeared to be having a bit of fun with him, and then finally he thrashed Tristan's head against the tree, at least over a dozen times. Catherine heard his skull crack at once, and then there Tristan was, lying on the forest floor. He was dead. She couldn't believe it. The evil monster was dead. Was this even happening? She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The Bigfoot threw the deceased corpse over his shoulders. He then looked at Catherine through kind dark eyes.
He's gone now. I'll dispose of the body. He won't ever get to harm you again.
And with that, the Bigfoot glided away and was gone, and Catherine realized that the Bigfoot had spoken to her in her head telepathically. To cut a long story short, the body of Tristan was never found, but only a few people in Wyoming knew exactly what had happened to him, and that it was a male Bigfoot that had ended his life. No one felt any pity for Tristan, who in the eyes of the people that were privy to knowing the truth was nothing less than a monster as far as they were concerned. Catherine decided not to go to the police. What was the point any more? She didn't want to tell them about the depravity she had endured for 3 weeks. She didn't want what had happened to her to be made public, and she didn't fancy her personal details becoming common knowledge. Now that her perpetrator was dead, no other woman was at risk as far as she was concerned. Clarissa was exceedingly grateful, as was Nancy, for her silence. They certainly didn't want people to know about Tristan's dark past, as that might make them become a spectacle of public scrutiny. People would lightly point and whisper at both Nancy and Clarissa and say, "You see that woman over there and her child? Well, she was married to that dreadful monster that attacked that poor woman and kept her in an underground dungeon for over 3 weeks. Can you believe that?" Mrs. Cameron, Nancy's next-door neighbour, also thought the secret should be covered up. She realized that the Bigfoot that had killed Tristan was the very same creature that had rescued her mother from the searing heat on one of Wyoming's hottest days. She realized the creature had very much saved her mother's life, and that her mother wasn't going senile after all. Catherine soon became close friends with both Nancy and Clarissa, and 2 months after she had been abducted, she suddenly rocked up on their front doorstep, carrying in her arms a golden retriever puppy. "You saved my life, Clarissa, and probably many other women's lives besides, who could have been potential victims of your father. So this is for you. I know how much you've been wanting a golden retriever puppy." Clarissa was delighted, well, overjoyed to receive the puppy. She chose to call him Webber. It would seem that Bosman became a loving cat and developed a great friendship with Webber. Catherine received counselling and has since recovered from the trauma she experienced. She believes the trauma made her into a more compassionate person and has decided to embark on a career as a trauma counsellor herself. Nancy, when she looks back on her marriage with Tristan, has only one thing to say about it. "I think you know when there's something not right with a person. I knew there was something insidious and dark about my husband, but I just did not know what it was." Clarissa felt much the same. "I really wanted to love my daddy. I really did. But I always felt scared of him, and I didn't really know why. But now I do." So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.